Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh. Wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wahdahu la sharika lahu. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'd. فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So as our brother mentioned, that the title of this two-part series is the ideological attack against Islam. And before we continue, we'd like to make an important clarification, which some of the scholars like Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah have mentioned, because the word ideological, the ideological attack or the ideological battle against Islam. Is Islam an ideology? Is Islam an ideology? Question to the audience. Is Islam an ideology? No. Islam is wahi. Islam is revelation. Islam is wahi. So we make a distinction between that which is wahi, a revelation, and that which forms ideas in the minds of men. And the ideas in the minds of men, as we shall see inshallah ta'ala in these lectures, sometimes it can be kalam, what we refer to as kalam or al-Kalam. And we will expand upon that inshallah ta'ala at the right place in the lecture. Sometimes it can be fikr. Fikr, kalam, is a type of logical, rational reasoning which is used to speak in matters of Aqeedah. This is kalam. And there's fikr. Fikr is thought, an ideology. Fikr. And there is ra'i. Ra'i is opinion. All of these things contrast with wahi, which is revelation, which Allah has sent down. So it is a mistake for us to refer to Islam as an ideology, as a fikr, as a collection of opinions. This is incorrect, because we see many of the writers from the Hizbiyyin, when they try to defend Islam, they treat Islam as they would treat like communism or capitalism or socialism. They treat it as an ideology. This is a mistake. Islam is wahi. It is inspired from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the first clarification we should make about the title, that we shouldn't become confused by the title. What the title means is that there is an ideological attack. In other words, either there is kalam, or there is fikr, or there is ra'i, which is used to attack Islam, to undermine Islam. And Islam, as we shall see, consists of Aqeedah, things that we believe with our hearts, and methodologies, Manhaj, things that those things in which we have a way and a method and a procedure, foundations, principles, which the Sharia has outlined for us. So this should make clear that Islam, when we speak of Islam, we do not use the wrong labels, wrong titles. We do not confuse it with the ideologies that we shall be, inshallah ta'ala, speaking about. So what is the purpose of this talk? The purpose of this talk is that, as you should be aware, that especially in our times, and we mean in the previous 10 years, so in our times, in the previous 10 years, from roughly the year 2000 to the year 2010 to our time now, we have seen that there has been a great attack against Salafiyyah, an attack against its foundations, an attack against its principles, an attack against its scholars. And this attack is something that we want to be able to understand, its reality. What is its origins? Where does it come from? How is this attack? What are the principles which are used to make this attack? So what I've decided to do is, in these two lectures, inshallah ta'ala, my talk will be divided into 4 sections in order to help us to understand this topic And to expand upon this topic, my talk will be divided into 4 sections. There will be an introduction, first of all, a muqaddimah. This will consist of mentioning maybe 5 or 6 important principles. 5 or 6 important points or principles that we need to be aware of as we move through the lecture. So these 6 principles, we will explain them first, inshallah ta'ala. After this, in the second part, in part 2, we will do an analysis. We will look at 200 years of history from the year 100 Hijrah to 300 Hijrah. And the reason and the purpose for doing this analysis is because it will allow us to completely appreciate, we will appreciate completely the fitna that we are facing in the 20th century. Meaning that the fitna of the Ikhwān al-Muslimīn, Jama'at al-Tabligh, Hizb al-Tahrir, and all of the Jama'at which appeared in the 20th century, claiming to make da'wah to Allah, claiming to rectify the affairs. Because we see that the nature of the misguidance is very similar, is very, very similar. So we will use that first 200 years of history as a platform and as an example to help us better understand the recent 200 years of history. So that will be tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. Part 3 will be the recent 200 years of history. And that will look at the emergence of Ikhwān al-Muslimīn and certain figureheads like Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb and Mawdudi and Taqiyuddin al-Nabahani, and the way these people were affected in the same way that there were certain other people affected in the time of the Salaf, from the same angles. And then from that will lay the foundation to discuss the actual or one of the major ideological attacks against Salafiyyah in our time from certain people. And we shall name them inshallah ta'ala tomorrow. So this then, there are 4 parts to this lecture. A muqaddimah, 200 years of history from the beginning of Islam, 200 years of history in our recent history, and fourthly, we will be looking at some of the principles of Ikhwān al-Muslimīn that are spoken of by those claiming to be upon Salafiyyah. There are people today who claim to be upon Salafiyyah, yet they are practically implementing principles which have originated with Ikhwān al-Muslimīn. And so that, inshallah ta'ala, we will deal with tomorrow. So as for the muqaddimah, as for this introduction, then we have maybe 5 or 6 principles. First of all, when we say the ideological attack against Salafiyyah, we should understand that Salafiyyah is Islam and Islam is Salafiyyah. When we use the word Salafiyyah, we are referring to the deen of Islam as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it upon the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These 2 terms are synonymous. Salafiyyah is Islam as Allah completed it and perfected it through the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is that which the companions were upon and which they implemented. It is that which they conveyed to the tabi'een. It is that which was then conveyed to those who learned from the tabi'een. Meaning, we reach the time of Abu Hanifa and Az-Zuhri and al-Awza'i and Imam Malik. And likewise from them, it was passed on to the next generation when we reach the likes of Ash-Shafi'i and Imam Ahmad and Ishaq bin Rahuya. So when we say as-Salafiyyah, we actually mean the deen of Islam. We mean the deen of Islam. And so these 2 terms really are synonymous. Why is this important? This is important because unlike all of the other religions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guaranteed the preservation of Islam. For that reason, there has to be certain things, or there are certain unique features with respect to Islam, on account of which it is guaranteed to be saved, and up until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And these things, these affairs, although we don't want to divert at this stage, we see that Allah's Messenger has mentioned in one hadith, لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق. To the end of the hadith, there will never cease to be a group or faction of my ummah manifestly upon the truth. They will not be harmed by those who abandon them or who oppose them up until the command of Allah arrives. We see that unlike the previous nations, unlike for the Jews, the Christians and all other nations, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guaranteed for this ummah that there will be a faction amongst the scholars in every age and era who will be manifestly, clearly, apparently upon the haqq, upon the truth. And we will understand the significance of this hadith, inshallah ta'ala, when we expand upon it tomorrow. So this is the first point. Salafiyyah is the deen of Islam, and the deen of Islam is Salafiyyah, and that will remain pure and pristine in every single age and era, because Allah has promised that. Allah has made this deen unique, because this deen will remain up until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And so there will be those who are the means by which Allah ensures this deen is preserved. And of course they are the scholars, the ulama of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the Ahlul Hadith, the Ahlul Athar, those who follow the way of the Salaf. And so this is the first point that we should be very clear in our minds. Islam is Salafiyyah, Salafiyyah is Islam. Or to use what al-Barbahari said, Islam is the Sunnah and Sunnah is Islam. Or Islam is what the companions were upon, and what the companions were upon is Islam. All of these are the same meanings. Point number 2, the second point that we want to make is, or the second principle we should understand, that there is a false principle used by some of the groups of innovation, which is that they divide the religion into usul and furu'. Usul and furu'. So they say, in the religion there is usul and there is furu'. What do they mean by this? They mean by this that when we speak of usul meaning the foundations of something, that the foundations of something are those things which you believe in your heart. These are the usul. And as for the furu', the branches, they are the things that you act upon with your limbs. They are like, for example, the acts of worship and the dealings between the people, and so on and so forth. Where did this differentiation, where did it come from? Where did it originate from? Let's read the words of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says in Majmu' al-Fatawa, volume 19, page 207 onwards, he is discussing this issue of when a scholar may make mistakes. So in the course of that discussion, he says, and he speaks about the Imams of the Salaf, he says, قالوا والفرق بين مسائل الفروع والأصول إنما هو من أقوال أهل البدع من أهل الكلام والمعتزلة والجهمية ومن سلك سبيلهم. So he says, indeed, this differentiation between the issues of usul, that which we call usul, and that which we call furu', this is from the statements of Ahlul Bid'ah, from the Mu'tazila, and the Ahlul Kalam, and the Jahmiyyah, and whoever followed them. So this differentiation of the deen into usul and furu', what was intended by it by the Mu'tazila is they meant to say that the usul are those things which we can establish by way of the intellect, by the aql, and those things which are definitive, which are certain. Alright, so matters of belief, speech about Allah, speech about His name, speech about Tawheed, this is from the usul. And the furu', the matters which are from the furu', are those things that we speak which are practical matters, things which we act upon, and so on and so forth. And so they're the first ones who really made this distinction. And then they were followed in this by others. As he said, Ibn Taymiyyah continues, والفرق بين ذلك في مسائل الأصول والفروع كما أنها محدثة في الإسلام لم يدل عليها كتاب ولا سنة ولا إجماع. That just like this distinction is innovated in Islam, there is neither anything from the book, nor anything from the sunnah, nor anything from ijma', which even proves or gives evidence to this foundation. There is nothing whatsoever. And he says, وَلَا قَالَهَا أَحَدٌ مِّنَ السَّلَفِ وَالْأَئِمَّةِ. And not a single one of the Salaf, the Imams of the Salaf, they never said this. And then he said, فَهِيَ بَاطِلَةٌ أَقْلًا. That even rationally speaking, this is false. This principle is false. And then he goes on to explain that those people who try to claim and bring a proof that yes, there is a distinction between usul and furu', they don't have any clear proof, and the proof is contradictory sometimes, and it's all inconsistent. So then he goes on. So the point that we're making here is that to divide the religion into usul and furu' is a mistake. Why is this a mistake? It's a mistake because when we look in the books of the Salaf, we see that usul, foundations of the religion, there are matters of belief and there are matters, practical matters, things that we act upon. When you look at all of the books of the Salaf that were written in the early times, you see that they mention from the usul of this religion, what do they begin with? To hold fast to that which the companions of Allah's Messenger were upon. Is this a matter of belief or is it a practical matter? What's the answer? Yeah, both. But it's a practical, it's a matter of belief because we have to believe that, of course, but it's practical as well. It's an asal that practically speaking we hold on to what the companions were upon. So is this now from the usul of furu', according to the Mu'tazila and al-Kalam and the Jahmiyyah, they were treated to be from the furu'. Okay? Likewise, to have patience upon the tyranny of the rulers. Is this a practical matter or is it a matter of belief? Oh, it's a matter of belief, but it's practical as well, right? Is this from the usul or from the furu'? Is it from the usul or from the furu'? From the, according to them, from the furu'. According to us, it's from where? The usul. Do we not see it mentioned in all the books of the Salaf? Sharh al-Sunnah, Usul al-Sunnah, Imam Ahmad, all the books of the Sunnah, we see it as an asal. And they say that whoever opposes this asal is from Ahlul Bid'ah. Okay? Likewise, we see many other affairs which are mentioned, which are from the usul, even from the scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah mentions in this passage. He says, likewise, the salah, the prayer itself is an act of ibadah. It is from the usul of Islam. Because whoever leaves the salah, then he has entered into disbelief. So the salah is from the usul of Islam. So even from that perspective, this differentiation, that usul are the matters of belief, and the furu' are the matters that we act upon from the ahkam and the ibadat and so on and so forth, this is batil from that aspect as well. Even from the aspect of the ibadat. Likewise, to abandon shirk and to abandon mocking the religion and so on and so forth, that itself is from the usul of Islam. So we see from all of these angles this claim that the usul and the furu', that there is a distinction between these two, that one is belief and one is practical matters. This is false. This is incorrect. And we need to be very, very clear about that in our minds, because when we understand this point, we will understand the misguidance of many of the people in our times who try to push certain things which are from our usul of this religion and they push them into the furu'. Don't cause splits in matters of furu' because they treat it to be from the furu', whereas in reality it is from the usul of this religion, from the foundations of this religion. So as I said, when you look into all of the books of the Salaf, they say, for example, Imam Ahmad, usul sunnati indana, the fundamental principles of the sunnah with us are, and then they start mentioning them. To hold fast to what the companions were upon, to abandon innovation. Then they continue to have patience upon the tyranny of the rulers, to accept the legality of the rulership of a man who either takes over us by way of force or by way of the acceptance of the Muslim. There are many things which are like this. Likewise, in terms of fitna, when there are found the Khawarij, to not enter into the fitna, to not enter into the fighting. And all of these things are from the usul of our religion. And as we see that they would expel from the sunnah anyone who opposed any of these usul. So it is not just matters of belief only, it is practical matters as well. Until even certain matters of fiqh, they would make them a distinction between Ahlul Sunnah and Ahlul Bid'ah, like wiping over the socks, for example. Okay, so we see even those matters came into the books of Aqeedah, the books of usul. So this is a second point now that we should be very clear in our minds. This distinction between usul and furu', and limiting usul to matters of aqaid, beliefs, and furu' to practical matters, this is false. It is opposed to what the Salaf were upon. The third issue that we need to be aware of, which is connected now, it leads on from the second point, is that this deen of Islam, it consists of aqaid and manahij. It consists of beliefs that we hold and methodologies that we follow. Beliefs that we hold and methodologies that we follow. And we see that these two, Aqeedah and Manhaj, are fundamentally connected. They are connected like this. You make mistake in one, you will make a mistake in the other. Your mistake in one is because you made a mistake in the other. And the perfect example to give you of this, very quickly, because we don't want to spend too much time on this is just the muqaddimah, but very quickly, we have some statements here from Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, Shaykh Ubaid, al-Jabri, hafzahullah. So I'll quickly give you the essence of what they said, because to read through all of it will take too much time. Here we have a statement from Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah. He says, the general gist of the article is that errors in manhaj, usul, there are usul in manhaj and usul in aqeedah. Remember, so from the second point we said that usul, there can be usul in aqeedah and there can be usul in manhaj. We don't make a distinction. Aqeedah and manhaj, all of it is from the usul. So the Shaykh says, the general gist of what it says, he says that manhaj, al-manhaj, barakallahu feek, mabniyun ala al-aqeedah. Manhaj is founded upon the aqeedah. Whoever's aqeedah is sound, his manhaj will be sound as well. And then he continues to explain that mistakes in aqeedah mean mistakes in manhaj. Mistakes in manhaj lead to mistakes in aqeedah. When we see a problem in one area, it is because there is a problem in another area. This is the gist of what Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen says. Shaykh Ubaid al-Jabri, hafzahullah, he mentions and gives the example of the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila. The Khawarij and the Mu'tazila, we see that they made a mistake in aqeedah. They declared a sinful Muslim to be a kafir. And built upon this mistake in aqeedah, they were led to other affairs, mistakes in other practical affairs. They began to rebel and fight against the Muslims. They began to fight against sinful rulers. So the issue in aqeedah was tied to a mistake in manhaj. And the mistake in manhaj was tied to an issue in aqeedah. Another example, quick example of how these affairs are tied together is when you look at that beautiful narration of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, when he came across the people who were sitting outside the mosque, sitting in circles, counting, doing tasbih and tahleel and tahmeed with stones. So one man said, say Allahu Akbar 100 times, and they followed and said Allahu Akbar 100 times. So from the lessons that we learn from this story is that these men, when they departed from the sunnah, and they claimed that we were only trying to do good, we intended good, and so the companion Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he told them off and said, you better count your sins. How quickly you go to destruction. The messenger's clothes are intact, his pots are still intact, and you think you are on a better guidance. Are you a better guided than what the messenger himself brought? So eventually at the end of it, what happens in the narration is that these people who made this mistake and departed from the sunnah in a practical matter of ibadah, these people were found and they were killed on the day of Nahrawan with the Khawarij. With the Khawarij. These people who fell into this. From the lessons that we learn from this is that when you depart from the sunnah a small amount, then you will open up the door to start making mistakes in other affairs of the religion, in aqeedah, in manhaj. So the fact that they died fighting with the Khawarij means that they had mistakes, and they fell into mistakes in aqaid and manahij as well. All from a slight departure from that which the Messenger ﷺ was upon. So from this, the third principle that we should understand and have very firm in our minds is that the deen of Islam consists of aqaid, beliefs that we hold. So we believe in Allah, His names, His attributes, paradise, hellfire, the affairs of the unseen, the angels, and all those affairs, and the final day and everything. And likewise, there are manahij, there are methodologies. We have a methodology in how we make tafsir of the Qur'an. That's from our usul. We have a methodology in how we deal with the rulers. We have a methodology in how we deal with the innovators. All of these are from the usul as well. So all of these are from the usul of Islam. And so again, when we look at the books of the Salaf, we see this very, very clearly. Very, very apparently. So this now is the third point that we need to have concrete in our minds. The religion is aqeedah and manhaj. The two are tied like this. Mistakes in one means mistakes in the other. The fourth principle I want you to be aware of, inshallah ta'ala, and have very firm in your minds as well, is that beliefs and ideas live longer than men. Write this down. Beliefs and ideas live longer than men. What year Hijrah are we in now? 15th century? 1433? 15th century. Do we have the Khawarij amongst us? When did the Khawarij emerge? 14 centuries ago? Right? So ideas live longer than men. This is a general principle. Ideas always live longer than men. Beliefs live longer than men. Even amongst the kuffar, you see that today the kuffar in their nations, the way they run the nation, the way they structure their nation, the way they rule the people, they have taken those ideas from Plato and Aristotle. Thousands of years, before. So ideas live longer than men. Because ideas live longer than men, then we see that the Salaf who recognized and knew this, that when a new idea is introduced, that idea could last for the next 1,000 years and misguide millions and millions and millions of people. And for that reason we see, why did the Salaf behave the way they did towards the Khawarij and the Rafida and the Murji'ah and the Qadariyah and the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila? Do you know how the Salaf behaved towards them in the 2nd century, 3rd century? They used to be killed. They used to be beaten. They used to be imprisoned. Someone who denied Allah is above the throne, he would be thrown into prison and beaten up until he repented. And then they accuse us, Masakeen, as Shaykh Rabi says in one of his statements where he's defending Ahlul Sunnah. He says, look at us Masakeen Salafis. They say we are harsh. Why don't they look at the Salaf? The Salaf, this is what they would do. If they found someone who didn't, they would have him killed, like the Salaf killed Jahm bin Safwan, Al-Ja'd bin Dirham, and many others, or they would have them beaten, they would have them imprisoned, and then they accuse us Masakeen. We're not even implementing 100th of what those people were implementing. That's what Shaykh Rabi says. We are very kind, we're very gentle compared to what the Salaf were upon. And then they accuse us of being harsh. But the point I want to make is this. Alongside how harsh the Salaf were upon those people, did their ideas die? Did the ideas of the Khawarij die? Murji'ah, did they die? The Qadariyah, did they die? The Jahmiyyah, did they die? Today the world is full of Jahmiyyah, because the Ash'aris are the Jahmiyyah. The world is full of them in every place. In the Far East, in North Africa, in Sham, in the West. The whole dunya is full of the Jahmiyyah, despite how the Salaf behaved with those people in that time. So my dear brothers, the 4th point is, beliefs and ideas live longer than men. They live longer than men. And for that reason, we see that because the deen of Islam is something that will be protected and preserved, meaning the Sunnah and Salafiyyah, then there has to be within Islam something that is from our usul as Ahlul Sunnah, that which if we implement and act upon, it will protect that religion, that Salafiyyah which is Islam. It will keep it protected and preserved from all of these false ideas and false beliefs and false opinions and false ideologies. Okay? So this is the 4th point that we should be aware of. Just a quick announcement. The sisters are not able to hear due to chatter in the back. So may I please request with all with the sisters at the back to please remain silent to allow the other sisters to benefit and to listen. They can't hear because there is a lot of chatter in the back. So please remain silent. If you need to talk, then maybe leave the building, then come back. But at least have some respect for the people who want to benefit from the lesson, inshallah ta'ala. So please try to maintain your silence. Jazakumullahu khairan. So point number 4 is that beliefs and ideas live longer than men. And for that reason we see that the Salaf, they were extremely severe against innovation and his people, because they understood that this is undermining Islam itself. This will undermine Islam itself. Do you realize, do you think about this. Do you think if Imam Ahmad rahimahullah and many of the Imams of the Salaf never took a stance in their time, do you think you would know what the Aqeedah of the Salaf was today? Do you think you might be believing that Allah is above the heaven today? Or do you think that you possibly might be someone who believes Allah is in every place? If they hadn't stood and spoke against the Jahmiyyah, do you think that? We have to thank them, thank Allah first and foremost, and thank them for that which they performed of preserving this deen. And likewise it applies to us in our time. If the scholars in our time, and likewise ourselves as Ahlul Sunnah, if we don't implement these usul, do you think in 300 years from now, do you think that there will people will have something which they know to be Salafiyyah? Something which they know to be that which the companions were upon? Do you think? The answer is no. But of course, Allah from His qadr, He has determined that there will indeed be a people. But the point being is that if we don't use these asbab, these ways and means which are from that which we know from the Sunnah, from the Deen of Islam, then this will be the evil outcome, which is exactly what happened to the Jews and exactly what happened to the Christians. Tabdeel of the religion was altered because no one stood and preserved and protected, and so the wrath of Allah fell upon them, and that was their evil end. So the point being then is that beliefs live longer than men. The fifth point, which follows on from this now, from the fourth point, it's all connected. The fifth point is that one of the things that we learn from history, when we study history and some of the major innovations, we see that innovation comes in waves. Innovation comes in waves. So the best way to understand this is to picture a situation. Imagine a rock, a huge rock, which falls into an ocean. And when it falls into the ocean, you see the waves coming. So what will happen is, as the waves come to the shore, there will be a delay. There will be a short delay. So maybe the first wave will hit, and maybe 2 minutes afterwards, another wave will hit. So this is how it is. And bid'ah is the same. The innovation comes in waves. It's caused by the same rock that falls, but then it comes in waves. Let me give you an example of this. And in fact, this is something that we will be discussing in a bit more detail in this lesson, inshallah ta'ala. We see that the innovation of the Jahmiyyah, who denied Allah's names and attributes, this was the first major innovation. Then after this came the Mu'tazila, whose innovation was slightly more subtle. After them came the Ash'ariyah or the Kullabiyah in the next century, so it took another century roughly. Then after them came another century, the Ash'ariyah. But all of the bid'ah of all these groups is actually from the same foundation, which was, inshallah, we'll look at that in more detail shortly, inshallah ta'ala. So we see that because, as we said, ideas live longer than men. Ideas live longer than men. We see that when ideas spread and innovation spread, we're not talking 1 minute and 2 minutes between the wave hitting the shore and another wave. We are talking in tens of years, 50 years, hundreds of years. By the time these ideas, these innovative ideas spread amongst the ummah. How did they spread? They spread through people, interaction. And interaction, movement, migration, and all of this takes time. So this is how bid'ah spreads in the ummah. It takes centuries. Just like shirk, when shirk emerges, does it happen overnight? No. It takes many, many, many generations. So this point number 5 is that innovation appears in waves. Let me explain this to you more clearly from a statement by Ibn Battah, rahimahullah. Ibn Battah, rahimahullah, in his book al-Banna, he has a chapter here where he says, وَاعْلَمُوا رَحِمَكُمُ اللَّهِ أن صنفا من الجهمية اعتقدوا بمكر قلوبهم وخبث آرائهم وقبيح أحوائهم أن القرآن مخلوق. He said, no, may Allah have mercy upon you, that there is a group from the Jahmiyyah. They believed out of plotting in their hearts and the evil of their opinions that the Qur'an is created. This is what the first Jahmiyyah, they believed in the first century, that the Qur'an is created. So he said, but what they did is that they used another innovation, بِبِدْعَةٍ اِخْتَرَعُوهَا تَمْوِيهًا وَبَحْرَجَةً عَلَى الْعَامَةِ. So now they innovated a new innovation in order to hide the first one. So what they now began to say, and he says that they did it in order to hide their kufr and in order to make obscure their ilhad, their deviation. So he said, they began to say, إِنَّ الْقُرْآنَ الَّذِي تَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ بِهِ وَقَالَهُ فَهُوَ كَلَامُ اللَّهِ غَيْرُ مَخْلُوقٍ. So they began to say, yes, the kalam which Allah spoke with and which He spoke, this is the kalam of Allah, it is uncreated. وَهَذَا الَّذِي نَتْلُوهُ وَنَقْرَؤُوهُ. But this Qur'an that we recite and that we speak with our tongues and which we write with our pens, this is not the Qur'an which Allah spoke with, rather it is something else and it is created. Okay, now, this idea emerged in the 2nd century. The 3rd century. Whereas the Jahmiyyah in the 1st century, in the 2nd century, they began to say the Qur'an is makhluk. In the 3rd century, around the time of Imam Ahmad, this group came along and they tried to conceal that bid'ah, to hide it. And so they began to say, yes, we accept the Qur'an, the Qur'an is the speech of Allah, it's not created, but there is something else that we recite with our tongues and write with our pens, this bit is created. And this was only to hide their kufr, to hide their disbelief, and to make the bid'ah more obscure, to make it a bit more difficult to understand what's going on. And that's why these people were called as the Lafdhiyyah. The Lafdhiyyah, those who claim that the speech of the Qur'an, recitation of the Qur'an is created. And the Imams of the Salaf, they knew exactly what these people intended, and so they declared them, as Ibn Battah has said, that they are upon kufr, like those who came before. This point is extremely important for you to understand when we come to discuss tomorrow the ideological attack in our time against Salafiyyah. This principle here in what I've read from Ibn Battah. Why? Because we see that innovation comes in waves. We have a major innovation which is apparent in its falsehood. The Jahmiyyah said, Allah is not above the throne. The Jahmiyyah said, Allah does not speak. The Jahmiyyah said, the Qur'an is created. The Jahmiyyah said, Allah will not be seen. Fast forward 100 years or 200 years, what do we see now? It's the same innovation underneath, the same kufr, but now they are saying, yes, Allah will be seen, but not in a direction. Yes, Allah is above the throne, but He's not confined in space. You are saying the same thing, but you're trying to conceal it with philosophical words and you're trying to defend it and you're trying to conceal it with falsehood. So we see that innovation comes in waves. It comes in waves. When it first comes and it gets refuted, then it now becomes more subtle and more hidden because they now try to push the same innovation but in a deceptive, tricky way. And then that gets refuted. Then they bring something else in a more deceptive way. You understand? So innovation comes in waves, and so we have to understand this. And when we come to discuss the contemporary, the people of innovation in our times and how they follow the same method and same procedure. The 5th issue that we want to come to, or the 6th, now we come to the 6th issue, is that we should understand, we should keep in mind, is that we've already mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will preserve this religion until Yawm al-Qiyamah. This deen will remain intact, its beliefs will remain intact, its methodologies will remain intact, its usul will remain intact, and this is all by the presence of the ulama whom Allah has chosen, whom He has mobilized against the people of bid'ah and dalala. But one thing that we should realize is that in any one given time, where we have, no matter which century we are in, we could be in the 4th, 10th, 6th, but we are now in the 15th century. We see that in any one time, when we put all of the scholars of the Sunnah together, we see that amongst themselves, all of them, they have refuted all of falsehood. All of falsehood. So for example, in our time, let's say, we have Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah, Shaykh Ibn Baz rahimahullah, Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah, Shaykh Ibn Baz rahimahullah. Likewise before them, Shaykh Abdurrahman bin Nasr al-Sa'di rahimahullah. When we look at them, we see amongst them, and likewise the scholars who are alive, we see amongst them are those who refuted the atheists, those who refuted the philosophers. Like al-Sa'di rahimahullah has some very good books he wrote in his time, refuting the Malahida, the atheists and the philosophers and other than them. Some really excellent books which he has. Likewise, we see Ibn Baz rahimahullah, he refuted the communists, he refuted the Zionists, he refutes the missionaries. He has a book here, Al-Ghazw al-Fikri, the ideological attack against Islam. In this book, this really nice book, he explains this ideological attack against Islam. It comes from different groups of people. From them are the Christian missionaries, from them are the Zionists, and from them are the third group, the communists and the socialists. That these people have come to attack Islam and to attack the Arabs and to bring the ideological revolution against Islam. Likewise, we see amongst them those who refute the Sufis and the Rafida and the Jahmiyyah, and the Muqallida, those who call to blind following of the Madahib. So the point being, and then they mention, and then they refute certain people by name, like al-Banna rahimahullah refuted. Who did refute? Abu Ghadda and al-Buti and all these other people. So when we put all of them together, the scholars together, we see amongst them all, we see, walhamdulillah, that they have clarified all of truth from all of falsehood, from all of the innovations of the Rafida, Khawarij, Murjiya, Jahmiyyah, Mu'tazila, the Aqlaniyah, the Sufiyyah, the people of Wahdatul Wujud. But we see that not every single scholar is refuting every single innovation. We see some scholars, they will speak about some because they specialize in that, and other scholars will speak about others. Right? This leads us on to a fundamental principle in our religion, which is what we call, and you will hear this word tomorrow in more detail inshallah ta'ala, it is called Jarh Mufassar. Jarh Mufassar, which is called a detailed criticism. A criticism which is produced with evidence. This is fundamental in our religion because of a practical and physical reality that we simply cannot escape, which is that there is no one scholar who can encompass all of truth and all of falsehood on his own. This is why I said that that the truth of Islam at any one time is embodied amongst all of the scholars collectively. They will all have something of the truth, and they will all have something of contribution towards clarification of the truth and of falsehood. And it was never, ever, ever a principle in Islam that in order for something to be falsehood, that every single scholar had to agree upon it. Let me ask you a question. Did every single scholar in the time of Imam Ahmad refute the Jahmiyyah and write books on the Jahmiyyah? Answer? There were tens of thousands of scholars who were put to trial in the fitna of the Qur'an. How many of them actually wrote books? How many? How many books do we have? You know, we can list maybe, I have a list here of maybe 120 books that have come to us, there is. Maybe there are others. But considering there were hundreds of thousands of scholars who were present, not all of them wrote and authored books in refutation of the people. So the point being is that the reality is that not every single scholar can encompass all of falsehood, just like not every single scholar can encompass all of the truth in every single issue. For that reason, there are principles in the deen of Islam that ensure that the truth is not lost. And one of those principles is that when we receive the news of a trustworthy person, meaning here a trustworthy alim, who informs us, who knows, who has basira, who has insight, that this is falsehood, this is batil, or that this person is a mubtil, he is upon falsehood, then it is from our principle of our religion that we accept that from him as long as he brings evidence. Even if there are 100 people who say otherwise. Let me give an example. There's a person called Abdullah. We have two people. One person says about Abdullah, I see him in the masjid for Fajr, I see him in Dhuhr, I see him in Asr, Maghrib and Isha. Likewise, I see him rushing to be righteous to his parents. Likewise, I see him giving charity all the time. I see him going to Umrah every year. All I know from this man is khair and goodness. By Allah, this man is a pious, righteous man, and he never keeps company with any of the people of sin and disobedience and so on and so forth. Then the second person, and both these people are trustworthy and honest. Second person says, well, you know what? I saw him last week, and I saw him with whatever example it could be. I saw him coming out of this place, and with him was a woman dressed in a certain way, whatever, and I saw him do such and such, whatever. So what you've seen from him, I've seen something else. Is there a contradiction here? Is there a contradiction? No, there isn't. There isn't a contradiction. Because one person has additional knowledge that the other person doesn't have. There isn't any contradiction. You put all of that together, you have a fuller picture of that individual. One person sees piety, righteousness and so on and so forth, but another person has seen something else. So now in this issue, whose view do we take? Whose view do we take? Person two, right? If this wasn't a principle of our religion, do you think that the deen of Islam would have remained as pure as it is now? Do you think it would have? What are the implications of rejecting this principle? What are the implications? Yes? Yeah. The implications of this principle, of not accepting this principle, is that we have to take all the books of the Salaf and throw them in the fire. This is what the implication is of this principle. Because it means now we have wronged all of those innovators who are mentioned in the books of hadith, who are mentioned in the books of the Sunnah, that they were spoken of by so many of the Imams of the Salaf. It means that we have to throw all those books away, throw them away. Why? Because those people have, if we don't accept this principle, we have to basically undermine the very deen of Islam. We have to undermine the very deen of Islam. Because if we are going to say, well, actually, no, all we know from this guy is good, and that opinion of that person is just something that's, contradictory and whatever else, we can't accept it. This now means that the whole of history, that we have wronged all of the innovators. We have wronged Wasil bin Atta. We have wronged Amr bin Ubaid. We have wronged Bishr al-Marisi. We have wronged... Why? Because these people wrote about Islam. They defended Islam in certain respects. They, who says they don't have good issues? There's no Muslim you'll find except that he has good in him. So this means that we undermine the very thing which protects the religion from that which occurred to the Jews and the Christians. So this means that... So the point that we're making here is, as I was saying, that when we take all of the scholars in any given time, we see that all of them will refute something of falsehood to a great or lesser amount, even though there are some who are unique in refuting a specific falsehood. Like in the time of the Salaf, we see that some of the Imams of the Salaf, they wrote works on certain groups, but other scholars didn't write. Let me give an example. The scholar in the 5th century, Abu Nasr al-Sijzi, rahimahullah, he wrote a book on Ibn Kullab and al-Ash'ari, refuting them on the issue of the Qur'an being the speech of Allah and Allah's speech being al-harf wa sawt, letter and voice. There is no other book you will find, Allahu A'lam, where you will find that these two individuals, Ibn Kullab and al-Ash'ari, are refuted by name in this detailed manner. Nowhere else, in that particular manner. So this shows that it is not the case that every alim has to come along and every alim in the dunya has to refute that person before now we come to accept the criticism. No. When an alim comes, he brings proof and evidence, then it is upon us to accept that proof and evidence. But this issue is something we will expand upon in detail tomorrow. But I wanted to mention it here because it relates to these principles that we are mentioning at the beginning as a muqaddimah. So this comes to the end of this muqaddimah. Let's recap again. What was the first point? What is the first point? Yeah. When we say ideological attack against Islam or Salafiyyah is Islam. Islam is Salafiyyah. This is the first point. Second point was? Yeah, anybody else? What was the second point? Second point was? Claiming that they're dividing the religion into usul and furu'. This is wrong. Why is it wrong? What's the proof that it's wrong? What is the proof? Give me a proof. How can you demonstrate this is wrong?
Because the usul, we have usul that are practical things.
Yeah.
Such as now we're voting over
Yeah. Yeah.
and whatnot.
Yeah. That's right, yeah. Usul, the usul of the religion are not limited to matters that we believe in. Usul of the religion involves practical matters as well. You can leave Ahlul Sunnah by a practical matter, just like you can leave Ahlul Sunnah by way of a matter of belief. Okay? The proof for that, and as we said, the proof is in the books of the Salaf. What was the third principle?
Ideas last longer than men.
Sorry?
Ideas last longer than men.
That was the fourth one. Third one. Aqeedah and Manhaj. The deen consists of Aqaid and Manahij. And this is what the Salaf intended when they wrote their books. When you see all the books, Kitab al-Sunnah, Sharh al-Sunnah, Usul al-Sunnah, Sarih al-Sunnah, what they meant was these are issues of Aqeedah and Manhaj which are from the Usul, which are the Sunnah. Right? And this is very, very clear in the books. That was the third point. Fourth point. Fourth, ideas live longer than men. Ideas always last longer than men. This is a fact of the dunya. Ideas always last longer than men. That's why the Salaf, they knew this, that if this idea is not prevented, then come 50, 100, 1,000 years, what deen will the Muslims have left? And despite the fact that the Salaf did what they did of severity and harshness, do we still find the same innovations present today? Yes. So what does that show? What does that show? Tell us about us, how we need to hold on to the deen of Islam. In fact, this itself is taken from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's an authentic hadith. The Messenger said, "Indeed, there will be fitan. There will be fitan." He turned to the companions. Indeed, there will be fitan. And so the companion said, "What do you advise us?" So the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were sat on a rug. So he grabbed the rug and he went like this. He went like that. And he held very, very tight onto it. So again, another time, he said, "Indeed, there will be fitan." And so the companion said, "What do you advise us?" And so he said, "Tarji'una ila amrikum al-awwal." He said that you return back to the very first affair. That you go back to the very first affair. So the point that we're making here, is that even though the Salaf took the position that they did, and they took those positions against those sects because they took that from the Messenger himself, because the Messenger told them there will be Khawarij, there will be the Qadariyah, and there will be splitting, differing, callers to misguidance. Despite the fact that they took that position, we still see all of the bid'ah present today. All of them present today. So what does that say about Masakeen like us living in the 15th century? So ideas live longer than men. And the fifth point was, what was the fifth principle? Innovation. One of the things when we study bid'ah, we see it comes in waves. It comes in layers. First its batil is plain. Then it becomes more subtle, a bit more hidden, a bit more deceptive. And this is crucial for us to understand for tomorrow's lesson. Inshallah ta'ala. And the sixth principle that we should be aware of is
takes precedence over Thana Mujmal.
That's right, yeah. That it is from the fact of life that no one scholar can encompass all of the truth or all of falsehood. For that reason, we see that when we take all of the scholars together, we see, well, alhamdulillah, all of them refute to a large, to some extent or to others, they refute all falsehood collectively, even though some scholars will specialize in certain areas. So an alim who has most knowledge of the books of Sayyid Qutb, like Shaykh Rabi did, he annihilated this innovator, this evil Rafidi. But really, Shaykh Rabi was the man who pretty much single-handedly, he destroyed this man and his books and removed him, meaning expunged him, from the propaganda that was being made for him. He played an instrumental role. So he was one who did that. And likewise, we see there are other scholars who have an instrumental role, like Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad. He has books against refuting other innovators who attacked the dawah of Ibn Abdul Wahhab. And then we have some other scholars, like al-Albani rahimahullah, who will refute Abu Ghudda in the field of hadith and al-Buti and so on and so forth. And Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan will refute al-Qaradawi in another book. And this is how it is. So if an alim brings evidence against someone, we take it and we accept it. This is subhanAllah, the actual deen of Islam, the sunnah itself rests upon this fact and this asl from the religion. If we invalidate this asl or this principle, we have to throw away thousands and thousands of years, and therefore every innovator now, the speech against him is abolished, if we don't stick to this principle. So this is the sixth principle I wanted you to be aware of, and all of these are principles from the Muqaddimah. So any questions on any of that, any issues that anyone might have before we go to part 2? Yeah.
My question would be, what about if two contemporary scholars differ about a certain person?
Yeah. The question is that what if we have two contemporary scholars who differ about a certain person? The answer to that is the point that we just mentioned, is that whichever alim brings in evidence which is detailed, if the person is known to be a person of the sunnah, if he's previously known to be a person of the sunnah, then we have to bring a detailed evidence. Okay. If it's a person who's not known to be upon the sunnah, he's just, nothing's really known about him, then the saying of an alim, just one alim, even if it's just general, this is acceptable. if he's not known to be upon the Sunnah. But if it's someone who is upon the Sunnah, known to be previously upon the Sunnah, then the evidence has to be detailed. As long as an alim brings that, then whatever any other alim says, it makes no difference, because we have to follow the evidence. Follow the evidence. The one who has additional knowledge, then this is whose knowledge that we take. But inshallah, this will be in more detail tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. Any other questions before we continue?
If there's a thinker, a famous thinker like Abbas al-Aqad,
Yeah.
and he writes very good books, can we read those books for benefit?
La, no. Do not read the books. Abbas al-Aqad is a philosopher, existentialist thinker who was affected by the philosophies of the non-Muslims, and we will cover him tomorrow. He's one of the names tomorrow from the 20th century. We will cover him tomorrow. No, we do not read the books of these people. These people are like the ul-Kalam in the 2nd century. Just like the scholars warned from the people of Kalam that that whoever enters into Kalam, he will never prosper. Whoever enters into Kalam, his end affair that he will enter into Zandaqa. So likewise in our time, this is really tomorrow's lecture inshallah ta'ala, but people who like Abbas al-Aqad, these are thinkers who came in the 20th century, they were affected by socialism and they read the books of the Western philosophers and they tried to write about Islam upon that poison, or affected by that poison. So we do not read any of their books. Not at all. Not at all. It is poison. Okay, one final question. One Samtullah.
Al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, is it the same Aqeedah as Salafiyyah? And I have another question. People who do bid'ah, do they do it like for a purpose, or they just do it because they don't know?
Okay, first.
I'm from Bilad Sham, you know Bilad Sham.
Yeah.
A lot of things, and
Yeah.
people just follow it.
Okay, first question quickly. Ahlul Sunnah, are they the same as Salafiyyin? The answer is that the people of the truth have many different names. Right, so Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Right. Likewise, Ahlul Athar, people who follow the Athar, meaning people who follow the narrations. Likewise, as you said, the Salafiyyin, meaning those who adhere to the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Tabi'een. Likewise, Al-Ghuraba, which is mentioned in the Hadith, those who are the strangers. Why? Because they are strange, because they adhere to the truth when most people abandon the truth. So likewise, the point being there are many names. All of these names are the same, are synonymous names for the same group of people, meaning those who stick to the Qur'an and to the Sunnah upon the way of the Sahaba. These are different names for the same people. They're not different groups. They're the same people, but characterized by different titles and different descriptions. As for the second question, very briefly, about people who fall into innovation, do they do it because they have an objective, or is it because they're ignorant? The answer is both. Either they do it because they're ignorant, they do not know that this is not from the deen of Islam, they do not know that this opposes the Sunnah of the Messenger, and this really is what we believe about most of the people. They're upon innovation not because of knowledge, it's because they are genuinely ignorant, and because they are misguided by scholars who are evil, who are astray, but who misguide the people. That's the first thing. And secondly, people who follow innovation, do they have any objectives? Well, no innovator ever worshipped Allah with his innovation with an evil intention. Every innovator thinks he has a good intention in trying to worship Allah. He's trying to please Allah. He's trying to become close to Allah. However, he has a branch from the branches of what the Christians fell into. Because the Christians fell into worshipping Allah upon ignorance. Even though they claimed to love Allah, wanted to please Allah. So likewise, these people, Allahu Alim, like the average worshipper, he doesn't, his intention is to become close to Allah. But in the deen of Islam, every act of worship has to have two conditions. It must be sincere to please Allah, and it also has to be correct. And this is something that prevents Islam turning into the deen of what happened to the Christians and those before them. So anyway, this ends the first session. And now we move to the second session, which is really laying the foundations for tomorrow's talk. So now what we're going to do, inshallah ta'ala, so you have to remember these 6 principles as we go along. You have to remember a lot of things, inshallah ta'ala. If you try to remember them as we go along, you will benefit a lot, because things will start clicking and the picture will start forming in your mind, like the jigsaw puzzle. So the 6 principles we mentioned, you've got to remember them as we go, as we continue. Now we move to part 2. Part 2 now is we want to understand Kalam, Ilmul Kalam. Because, as we said at the beginning, Islam is what? Islam is wahi, right? Islam is revelation. Islam is not kalam. Islam is not fikr. Islam is not ra'i. Islam is not rational philosophical things. Islam is not an ideology. Islam is not opinion. It is wahi, revelation from the creator of the heavens and the earth. And so those things which clash with and try to undermine Islam, this wahi, then it is of types. And one of those is kalam, ul-Kalam. And tomorrow we will be looking at fikr. Because the 20th century, the poison of the 20th century is fikr, ideology. The poison in the 2nd century of Islam was kalam, al-Kalam. So if we understand the 2 centuries from 100 Hijrah, meaning from when the companions passed away to the time of the Imam Ahmad and other than them in the 3rd century, then we will learn many crucial lessons, many important lessons that we will understand from that period. And really, to be honest with you, my dear brothers and sisters, you will not truly understand Salafiyyah. You will not truly understand the methodology of the Salaf until you understand what happened in these 2 centuries. Why? Because all of the books of the Salaf that we study, the books of Imam Ahmad, the books of al-Barbahari, the books of al-Humaydi, and all of the books that were written, they were written in this time in response to Kalam and its people. In response to Kalam and its people. So we will not really truly understand the matters of Aqeedah, Allah's names, Allah's attributes, the issues of Iman, and so on and so forth, unless we go back and we understand what is it that happened in this time. And what was it that came into the Ummah. And what was it that the scholars were warning against. When we look at that, then we will have a thorough understanding of Salafiyyah, and also how to implement the methodologies, the Manhaj, and the usul that these scholars have preserved for us in their books. Okay, so let's begin. And the first point that we make is that when Islam spread, we found that there were other nations that were present. There were the Jews, there were the Christians, there were the Sabaeans. The Sabaeans are those people who were originally from the people to whom Ibrahim alayhi salam was sent. But they became star worshippers. They began to worship the stars. So these nations, they were present when Islam came and the lands of Islam spread, and the companions also moved to different regions, but we do not see the companions or the tabi'een even interacting with these people or taking things from these people, from these other nations. And so what happened is that these nations that were present, there used to be certain sciences and certain philosophies that were widespread in that time. The best way to help you understand what I mean is, if you look in our time, in our century, we see that that amongst the kuffar, they have certain ideas which really form the foundation of their society. One of them is Darwinism. Okay, this idea that man emerged from monkeys and in gradual steps and so on and so forth. This now is the truth to them. And if you try to bring an opinion different to that opinion in science, you will be treated as being foolish and backward and barbaric and ignorant and stupid, right? Because this now is the accepted truth according to them. So for that reason, every single scientist who works in that field, when he brings some new results, he has to interpret his results upon the assumption that the evolutionary theory is correct and the truth. If he doesn't do that, he loses his career. His research is thrown down the drain, right? So this is how it is. This is how it is now in our time. In the same way, in that time, before Islam came, in the time of, let's say, in the time of Isa alayhi salam, and before the time of Isa alayhi salam, these nations, and after the time of Isa alayhi salam, these nations, like the Jews and the Christians and the Sabaeans, the same thing happened to them. There was a man by the name of Aristotle, and you've heard of this man, you know this man. This man was probably one of the greatest thinkers, greatest philosophers to those people in that time. Just like Darwin is treated now. Darwin is from the greatest thinkers, scientists, philosophers in our time. So likewise in that time, Aristotle was someone who was held in this esteem. So he spoke about the world, the universe, nature, science, everything. He held opinions on everything. So if you were not studying his sciences, you were seen to be backward. You were seen to be stupid. You were seen to be ignorant. So what happened is that the Jews and the Christians, because they had an inferiority complex, they began to incorporate those ideas of that man. And then they began to speak about matters of belief in their books upon the language of that man, of Aristotle. So they began to speak about Allah, His names, His attributes, using the language of that man. Okay. So this is what happened to the Jews, Christians, and the Sabaeans. They all inherited this language from, and this philosophy from Aristotle. Just like today, you have Muslims who go through the non-Muslim universities, they get affected by the science, and they start thinking, they start trying to turn and twist the Qur'an to make it fit with the evolutionary theory. Like we have this man, this deviant in England called Hassan, you probably heard about him, that he came out on the media, the news, trying to say that, we can merge the Qur'an with the evolutionary theory, and there's no conflict between Darwinism and Islam, and the Muslims today are just backward and so on and so forth. In the same way, in that time, we see the same thing. They were trying to be, in accordance with the latest philosophy, latest idea, and then they began to speak about Allah, His names, His attributes. So amongst the Jews and amongst the Christians, there were people, they had scholars, who were speaking about Allah, His names and attributes, just like the Jahmiyyah, who came many hundreds of years afterwards. So you will find amongst the Jews and the rabbis, those who were saying that the Torah is created. That the Torah is created. There were rabbis who were saying this. And this is where Ja'ad bin Dirham, he actually took his qawl, this is where he took it from. So the point being that there were already nations who were affected by this, and they were present in the Muslim lands, in Harran, in Damascus, in all these different places. So what happened is, in the 2nd century after Hijrah, we mean after 100 Hijrah, in the time of the Tabi'een, there was a man called Ja'ad bin Dirham. You've heard his name. He was traveling to these lands. He went to Harran. He was in Damascus debating with Christians. He was debating with the Jews, rabbis and other than them. And from this, he picked up this language. This language of this man, Aristotle, which came to him through those narrations, through those nations. So what was the philosophy of this man? Aristotle, he said that everything that we see in the dunya, it is either a jism, it is either a body, or it is the attribute of a body. Meaning that everything that we see in this universe, it's either an object which has a bulk, and likewise the properties of this object. So we have, we have a pen, it has a certain color, it has a width, it has a depth, it has a height. And likewise we have things which have taste, which have smells, which have colors. So everything that's in existence is either body, a jism, or it is an arad, it is an attribute. So this is Aristotle. He says that when we look at the universe, everything, this is what it is. So Ja'ad bin Dirham, he took this kalam, he took this speech, and then he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to be different from everything. Allah cannot be like anything in the creation. This principle is correct. Is this not correct? Allah is not like the creation. But then he took something which was correct, and then he brought something which is falsehood. So from the implications of this, or from the things that he began to say, is that Allah is not a jism. Allah is not a body. Did any of the Salaf say this? Do we find this in the Qur'an? Do we find this in the Sunnah? Do we find any companion making this statement? Right? Why did he make this statement? And why did Jahm bin Safwan, why did he follow him in this statement? Okay, the reason is because they were trying to debate with atheists, and they were trying to use the language of the atheists themselves. Is this the right way to do when you try to defend Islam? The answer is no. You cannot use the very same ideas and the language and the terminology of the people of falsehood in order to refute the people of falsehood. But that's what these people did. Ja'ad bin Dirham, Jahm bin Safwan, the Mu'tazila. This is the mistake they fell into. So what did they try to do? They tried to refute the atheists and the philosophers and try to prove to them that Allah exists, but the language they used was the same language of those philosophers. Al-Jism, Al-Arad, bodies and accidents and so on and so forth. And then when they agreed to use that language, they had to stick to all of the implications of that language. So for example, what they did was they said that Allah exists, and the proof that Allah exists is that when we see in things, in bodies, we see that they have attributes. Okay? Attributes, for example, this has a color black. How did the color black get in there? The color black, did it create itself? No. Did the color black create itself? No. So what they said was that attributes need things for them to exist in. Right? So they said, how did the attribute get into that thing? Someone must have put it there. Who put that thing in there? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put that thing in there. Okay, so they're trying to use this to prove Allah exists. So then, when the philosopher said to them, okay, in your Qur'an, describe Allah to us. Describe Allah to us in the Qur'an. So they said in the Qur'an. So then they thought, hang on, in the Qur'an it says Allah is hearing, seeing, speaking, above the heaven. These are attributes. So if we, now that means our proof is incorrect, because now we've proved that Allah has created himself as well. Because anything was attributes must be created. So when the Jahmiyyah looked at the Qur'an and they were trying to answer the philosophers, they said, wait a minute, we have to deny all of the names and attributes and the actions of Allah in the Qur'an. Because we've proved to these people that Allah exists by this method must be correct. So if this method is correct, then whatever we find in the Qur'an, Allah has names, attributes and actions, that can't be correct. It can't be correct. It must mean something else. So this is how they brought ta'weel. Right? Oh yes, Allah, when it says Allah has ilm, it doesn't actually mean ilm, it means something else. Allah is above the throne, or does it mean Allah is above the throne, it means something else. This is where ta'weel came from, because they assumed that because we've proved that Allah exists to these people using this method, then this method has to be correct. And so therefore we have to make the Qur'an fit to agree with this proof. That's where this innovation came. That Allah does not have names, Allah does not have attributes, Allah does not have actions, Allah is not above the heaven, Allah will not be seen. Allah will not be seen in the hereafter. Why? Because anything that can be seen must be a body, must have a direction, so this is false. And this would invalidate our proof that we are using against those people. So now what we see is that Jahm bin Safwan and Al-Ja'd bin Dirham, they brought this principle into the deen of Islam, which is what? Allah is not a jism. Right? Allah is not a jism. This is the rock. Remember I said to you at the beginning that there is a rock that's thrown in the ocean, and that's the initial false innovation, the bid'ah, the big bid'ah at the beginning. From that bid'ah, we see the waves that come afterwards. Remember that, the example I gave at the beginning? This is what's going on. So this bid'ah entered into the religion at the hands of these people, Ja'd bin Dirham and Jahm bin Safwan. Right. Okay, now, what happened from here is that this bid'ah then moved to the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila, they then took this bid'ah. Allah is not a jism. Allah is not a body. And then they began to write in their books, they began to expand upon this innovation. And then they said, we deny Allah's attributes. We accept His names, we deny Allah's attributes. Then this bid'ah moved in the next century to the Kullabiyah. Okay, they took this innovation. But then they said, we affirm some attributes, but we cannot accept Allah has actions. Okay, then this bid'ah moved on to the Ash'ariyah in the 4th century. Right, so you understand what's happening here. As we said, look at all the principles we said at the beginning. That bid'ah comes in waves. Okay, we said ideas live longer than men. All these things, we see this is what's happening in this period. So what these people then did is that when you innovate something, you have to then innovate other principles in order to defend that original innovation. Right? Let me give you a really silly example. It's a silly example, but from this you will understand, it will make it clear to you. When someone creates a new product, let's say technology, they invent a new product, an innovation, they create a new product, you don't just create the product, you create many other services, you create many other sub-products that you need to support and aid for that initial product to function properly, right? Isn't that the case? With bid'ah it is the same. So when you see that when this bid'ah of kalam, this is what is kalam, this is the bid'ah of ul-Kalam. This is what is called ul-Kalam, to speak about Allah and His names and His attributes using the language of foreign nations. This is what is called ul-Kalam. This is what the Salaf condemned. This is what Imam Malik was speaking about when he said, beware of bid'ah. And it was said to him, what is the bid'ah? He said, Ahlul bid'ah الذين يتكلمون في أسماء الله وصفاته وأفعاله. And those who speak about Allah and His names and His attributes, with something that does not come from the Messenger and the companions. This is what they were speaking about. That's what Imam Shafi'i was speaking about when he condemned Kalam, this Kalam. That's what Imam Ahmad was speaking of when he condemned al-Kalam, this Kalam. So when you invent this Kalam, now there have to be many other false principles you innovate in order to defend that original innovation. So what are these other false principles that were born as a result? When I say them, you will recognize them. Does somebody want to have a guess? Does somebody want to have a guess of an example of innovation? No, that's not a principle. That's just a resultant belief. Let me give you an example. Brilliant, excellent. We cannot accept ahad hadith. Mutawatir and ahad, the distinction. Right. Who brought this distinction? The Mu'tazila. Why did they bring this distinction? Why did they invent this principle of saying that mutawatir, we can accept it because it amounts to qat'i, it is definitive, and ahad is dhanni, it is speculative knowledge. Why did they invent this principle? Why? To deny the ahadith of the attributes. Because the ahadith of the attributes does not agree with their original foundation, which is what? Allah is not a jism, Allah is not a body. He cannot have attributes, He cannot have names, He cannot have actions. He does not make istiwa, He does not descend to the lowest heaven, He does not have ilm, He does not have basar. Why did they invent? Allah does not have a hand, face. This principle was invented in order to support the original innovation. So they said, mutawatir, we'll accept, and even that's not strictly true, they don't even accept the mutawatir. And the ahad are speculative, is speculative knowledge, we can't accept it because it doesn't give us definitive knowledge, and we are sinful if we believe in it. This is one of those principles that were a consequence of that original innovation. Okay, another one. Can somebody give me another one?
The Qur'an is an expression of the real, it's an expression. It's not something that Allah really sent down. So it's an expression of that.
Okay. You mean here that kalam nafsi and the kalam. This is a resultant belief. I wouldn't count it as a principle in itself, but it's kind of close. But I'll tell you something that you're close to. Another principle is, they said in the Qur'an there is majaz. There is haqiqah and majaz. That there is that which is really intended and that which is allegorical. Who brought this principle? Did the Sahaba speak of this principle? Did the Imams of the Salaf speak of this principle? Where did it come from? These people invented this principle. Why did they say it? To fight against the verses of the attributes. Right? The verses of the attributes are majaz. We can't believe in them. So why are they inventing these principles? Why? To support the original bid'ah, the original innovation. Right? So now we have mutawatir and ahad. We know why they invented this. The majaz and the haqiqah. We know why they invented this as well. Another one? Excellent. That was number 2 in my list. Al-aql, that the aql is superior over the naql. That the intellect comes ahead of revelation. What do they mean by this? Let me tell you what they mean by this. What they meant by this is that we are arguing with the atheists. We found a way to prove Allah exists. What is this way that what is this method that we've used that proves Allah exists? It is that we say that when we look in the creation, everything we see is either a body or it is an attribute in a body. Let's take a man for example. Let's take a leaf for example. We have a leaf and the leaf is colored green and it has a taste. How did the color green get in the leaf? Can the color green exist on its own? Do you ever see the color green walking down the street? Has anybody ever seen the color green walking down the street? You haven't seen the color green walking down the street? Likewise in a man has a headache. Do you see a headache walking down the street? No. Because these things can only exist in bodies. And what they mean by bodies, anything which has bulk, anything which has extension. So this is from Aristotle, that in the whole of the universe, we only have 2 types of things, either a body or its attributes. So they argued and said, look, how did these attributes get into these things? They can't have got into them, how did the color green get into a leaf? Did the color green come and create itself and put itself into a leaf? No. This shows that the color green is something that came to be after not being. Do you understand that? It came to be after not being. Then they said that because the leaf itself has an attribute that came to be, then the leaf itself must have came to be after not being. Right? So this is now they're trying to philosophize and go backwards and say, so this means that anything has attributes, it means that it originated and it came from nothing. And so the philosopher said, okay, we agree with you, this is a proof, okay, we accept this proof is correct. Now describe your Lord to us, describe Allah to us. How is Allah described in your Qur'an? Is that the meaning of ahad and wahid in the Arabic language? The answer is no. So what they began to do is they began to take words in the Arabic language which are mentioned in the Qur'an and give them philosophical meanings, meanings which come from the language of those people. And then they began to use those words in speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So likewise jism, the word jism, and the word wahid, and the word ahad, one. Likewise the word qadim, and likewise the word muhdath. So with all these examples they began to bring meanings which are not known in the Arabic language. This is another method that was introduced in order to support and help the original innovation. Also we have the usul and furu'. This is another example. We already mentioned at the beginning. Usul and furu'. This is from the bid'ah of the Mu'tazila. So anyway, the point in mentioning all of this is, do you understand what's going on? Do you understand what happened when this kalam came, this poison came, and this big original foundation that they had, that Allah cannot be a jism? From that original innovation, they had to deny Allah is above the throne, Allah will be seen in the hereafter, Allah descends to the lowest heaven, Allah ascends over His throne, Allah has names, Allah has attributes, which is all found in the Qur'an and Sunnah. Then to support that innovation, they brought all these false principles. Mutawatir, ahad, majaz, haqiqi, allegorical, so on and so forth. Zahir, ta'wil, tafweed. So is everybody clear about this? Is everybody clear about what is going on? Is everybody... Because this is crucial for you to understand for tomorrow's lesson. You have to really grasp this to understand tomorrow's lesson. So now, let's explain what's happened here. These people came along, they tried to refute the philosophers, and they tried to refute these other people, thinking they are going to defend Islam, right? Isn't that the case? They tried to defend Islam as they claimed. When they tried to defend Islam, what tools did they use? Did they stick to the methodology of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een? No, because these people never took knowledge from the Sahaba or the Tabi'een. These people themselves were mixing with the Jews, with the Christians, with the philosophers. So then from their ignorance they tried to defend Islam. That's what they tried to do. They tried to defend Islam. But they agreed to use the language and the terminology and the concepts of the very people they were trying to refute, right? Isn't this what happened? So then when they did that, they in turn had to invent false principles in the religion to maintain the arguments against those non-Muslims, right? Isn't that what happened? Mutawatir, ahad, usul, and furu', haqiqi, majaz, all these false principles they did. What was the result? The result was that in trying to refute an ideological attack against Islam, they themselves fell into another ideological attack against Islam that was worse and more harmful than the one they were trying to deal with in the first place. Is that clear? Is that clear? Because that is the main point that I'm trying to make today. Now listen to the statements from the Salaf. Listen to the statements of the Salaf. And you will understand the point I'm trying to make. Here we have Al-Hafidh Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi rahimahullah, from one of the great scholars. He has a book, Al-Iqtisad fil-I'tiqad. He says, you should know, may Allah have mercy upon you, wa'lam rahimakallah, anna al-Islam wa ahlahu utu min tawa'if thalath. You should know that Islam is attacked from three factions. And he mentions the first of them. The first of them are those who deny the ahadith of the attributes and who denied or rejected their narrators. Those people, فَهَؤُلَاءِ أَشَدُّ ضَرَرًا عَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ وَأَهْلِهِ مِنَ الْكُفَّارِ. He said there are three types of people who attack Islam. The first of them are those who deny the attributes, who deny the ahadith of the attributes and cast doubt upon the narrators of those who narrated the hadith of attributes. He said that they are more harmful to Islam than the kuffar. Than the kuffar. This is an example of how when you innovate something, trying to refute the non-Muslims, and then you innovate something false, you are more harmful to Islam than those non-Muslims themselves. Likewise, we see from Ibn Aqil, he said, there is nothing upon the Sharia. ما على الشريعة أضر من مبتدئ المتكلمين وجهلة المتصوفين. There is nothing more harmful upon the Sharia than the ignoramuses from the mutakallimin, from the people of Kalam. Why? Because they tried to refute the non-Muslims, but they refuted with falsehood, and so they ended up attacking Islam in a greater way than the people whom they're trying to refute in the first place. Likewise, we see Ibn Abdul Barr, rahimahullah, he says that Imam Malik used to hold that it is obligatory to seek the repentance of the Qadariyah and the Ibadiyah, and if not, they are to be killed. And then this was mentioned from some of the other Maliki scholars, and they would say that is this the view of Malik just towards the Ibadiyya and the Qadariyya? And they said no. Rather, this was the position of Imam Malik towards all of the innovators. And the reason why he held this view is because لِإِفْسَادِهِمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَهُمْ أَعْظَمُ إِفْسَادًا مِنَ الْمُحَارِبِينَ لأن إفساد الدين أعظم من إفساد المال. So he said that this was the view of Imam Malik towards all of the people of innovation, because their corruption is the corruption in the earth, and it is greater than the corruption of those who actually fight Islam. Right? So you understand why that is the case. Okay. Likewise, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said, speaking about the people of innovation and the disbelievers, he said that when the disbelievers, when they take over a land of the Muslims, they do not actually corrupt the hearts of the people. Why? Because the hearts of the people are already averse to the non-Muslims. That's why the ideological attack of the non-Muslims against Islam, most Muslims know it. They try to attack the woman, they try to attack the hijab, they try to attack inheritance, they try to attack the Muslim dress, they try to attack the hudud of Islam. No Muslim is really going to be affected by that. Most of the Muslims, they're not going to be affected by that, inshallah ta'ala. But when a mubtadi comes, an innovator comes along, and he comes in the name of Islam, and he says this is from Islam, and he corrupts the belief of the Muslims and the methodology of the Muslims, then this corruption is greater than the corruption that the non-Muslims can bring. And for that reason, it brings us now to the final point that I want to make, which is the question, which is, why did the Salaf, why don't we see from the Salaf, why didn't the Salaf refute those Jews and those Christians and those philosophers and the Sabaeans and the Hindu philosophers? Do we see any books from them? The answer is no. And Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh, he has an excellent explanation of this, and we will finish this lesson by reading his kalam. He says, Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh, he said that when we look at the scholars of Islam in the time of the Salaf, we see that the majority of their concern was with the Sunnah and refuting bid'ah and refuting the people of bid'ah. He says this is so apparent from the Imams of Islam. Their whole lives were spent refuting the innovators, but they did not occupy themselves with refuting the kuffar, the original kuffar from the Jews and the Christians. So he said that when you look at Imam Ahmad and Sufyan and Hamad bin Zayd and Hamad bin Salama and Nu'aym and all of the Imams of the Salaf like al-Awza'i and Ishaq and Ali bin al-Madini, all of these are scholars from the 2nd and the 3rd century, from 100 Hijrah to 300 Hijrah. These are the scholars who dealt with the poison of ul-Kalam that entered into the Ummah. So he's saying that when we look at all of these scholars, we see that the majority of their speech and their jihad, rather إنما هو في الرد على المبتدئة وفي نقد أصول المبتدئة, that all of their lives were spent in refuting the innovators and invalidating the false principles, even if those innovators were still remaining upon Islam, within the fold of Islam. They still spent most of the time refuting those people, but they did not occupy themselves in refuting the Jews and the Christians and all of the other nations of disbelief. وَذَلِكَ لأن شر المبتدع لا يظهر على أهل الإسلام. This is because the evil of the innovator is not something that's apparent to the people of Islam. Not apparent to the people of Islam. And the people of Islam will not be safe and secure from the evil of the people of innovation. But as for the kafir who is asli, the original disbeliever, who is a Jew or a Christian, then his evil and what he's upon is apparent to the Muslims. It's apparent to the Muslims. And so he says, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has explained the batil of the Jews and the Christians and the Dahriya, the atheists, already made it clear in the Qur'an. He's already made it clear in the Qur'an and made it clear in his book. And so he says, as for Ahlul Bid'ah, then the evil amongst them is much. And so for this reason, he said, now listen, this is the point now. For this reason, it can never ever be ascribed to the people, to Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, that they are deficient in refuting the Jews and the Christians. It can never ever be ascribed to Ahlul Sunnah that they are deficient in refuting the Jews and Christians and they are just occupied with refuting the people of Islam. You can never ever attribute that to the people of the Sunnah. This is something that is said by some of the Mu'tazila and the Aqlaniyin, the modernists and the rationalists. That's what they say. They say that you people of the Sunnah, all we see you doing is refuting the Muslims, refuting the people of Islam. And we don't see you saying a word against the kuffar and the Jews and the Christians and all the other, And so the Shaykh says that the reason for this is what I've just explained to you, which is that the evil of innovation is greater. Because these people come to the people of Islam in the name of Islam. But as for those people who are disbelievers already, the hearts are already averse to them. The hearts already know that these people have enmity, they're trying to corrupt the religion, these things they're trying to bring to attack the Sharia, to attack the woman, to attack the woman's dress, to attack the woman's modesty, to attack inheritance, to attack... We know this, they're trying to attack Islam. The hearts of the Muslims already have aversion towards them. But as for the Ahlul Bid'ah, then the Shaykh says we see that all of the Imams of the Salaf, not because they were ignorant, it's not because they never knew the falsehood of the Jews and the Christians, but rather they recognized the implications of what these people were upon and the harm that it would do to Islam and the Muslims. So then he says, for that reason, they did not preoccupy themselves in refuting the Jews and the Christians. And so he says, however, alongside this we see that, having said this, we see that the scholars themselves, we're not going to say that they don't refute the people of kufr, rather we see amongst them are those who write books and refute the people of kufr, like we've seen Ibn Taymiyyah refuted the Christians, Ibn al-Qayyim refuted the Christians. We see in our times the scholars like As-Sa'di, he refuted the atheists, the philosophers. Ibn Baz refutes the communists. We see the scholars have a role in this. But to say that to accuse Ahlul Sunnah that all you do is speak about the Muslims day and night, you don't speak again, this is wrong. And it's not a charge that can be leveled against Ahlul Sunnah. Why? Because it is from the principles of our religion that the harm of innovation is more severe upon the deen than the harm of an enemy whose enmity is apparent to the Muslims already. And for that reason, anyway, the Shaykh continues and he refutes this idea that, Ahlul Sunnah and the Imams of the Salaf, how come we don't see them refuting Jews, Christians? And the reason is everything that we've explained, and we've explained about the nature of innovation and its people. So that really brings us to an end of today's lesson. But really, today's lesson wasn't the actual topic. The topic is tomorrow. Today's lesson was just to help you to understand some of the basic foundations, to understand what happened in the time of the Salaf with the poison of Kalam. And tomorrow we will look at the 20th century. We will look at another poison. This poison is the poison of fikr, ideology. Today we looked at the poison of Kalam, al-Kalam, and how they invented false principles and so forth. Tomorrow we will look at the poison of fikr, ideology, and how they brought certain core innovations into the ummah, and then all of these innovated principles were then innovated by other people, like, I'll mention the names to you now: Hassan al-Banna, Maududi, Qutb, Nabhani. These are the first layer. This is the first layer. Just like Jahm bin Safwan and Ja'd bin Dirham is the first layer for Kalam, okay, in the 2nd century. In our times, the first layer to bring the major innovations are people like Hassan al-Banna, Maududi, Qutb, Nabhani. All of these people, they were affected by Marxism, socialism, communism, just like the people of Kalam were affected by what? The ul-Kalam of the Jews, Christians, Greeks, in the same way. Then we have the second layer who came after them, the next layer now, where they make the innovation a bit more subtle, a bit more obscure. These are people like Salman al-Awdah, Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq, Safar al-Hawali, and these people. Then we have another layer after that, who brings some more complexity, in trying to confuse the usul, right? Adnan Arur, al-Ma'rabi, and so on and so forth, right? So it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. So our aim tomorrow is to build upon what we've established today in this lesson, and so that we can better understand what's happening in our time, and how it is absolutely no different at all to what the Salaf were dealing with. Because all of these are from the usul of our religion. We don't make a distinction between matters of belief and practical matters. They are from our religion. As we said at the beginning, the usul and furu, this differentiation is false. Right? So that is what we will deal with tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. If there are any questions on anything that's been said today, we have some time, inshallah ta'ala. We'll try to deal with some of it, as long as you keep it to the topic and in anything that we've said. So the aim was to help you to understand, inshallah, to get a platform for tomorrow's discussion. Any questions?
Can you please repeat the 3 ways that Islam is attacked? That you're mentioning, the first one is they deny the ahadith and the attributes of Allah.
Yeah.
And this is more harmful than the kuffar. I didn't get the other 2.
Okay, right. The question, the quotation from, I don't have the full quotation from Ibn, where is it gone? It's Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. I only have that part. I only have that part of the statement, but I can get you that. I'll get you that, inshallah ta'ala. Anything else?
There are some people in higher institutions like universities, professors who say that with Salafiyyah, it limits intellectualism, and it causes intellectual stagnation in the Muslim community.
Right.
So how do we respond to it? Especially they say in the time of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the Muslim community was just budding to become intellectualized and had that, but these orthodox scholars just stamped all that out.
The question of the brother was, how do we respond to some of these professors in universities who say that in the time of Imam Ahmad, the Muslim Ummah was waiting to become intellectually advanced, but then when these Imams of the Sunnah came along, they put an end to that intellectual, that so-called intellectual advancement. Okay, so how do we respond to these people? To be honest with you, the answer is a bit lengthy in detail, but in principle, we understand that these people, in fact, this will be tomorrow's lesson as well. These professors, these people who look at Islam and study Islam, they're Orientalists. We call them Orientalists. And these people really study Islam from an angle really to support their own objectives. So they go into Islamic history, they study Islamic history, they study the Arabic language, they study the Qur'an, they study the Hadith sciences. All of these things that they are studying, not because of objective study, but it's to study in order to undermine the Muslims, and to undermine their unity, and to undermine them from going back to the true religion. This is the angle that they come from. So the reason why they support the Mu'tazila is because the usul of the Mu'tazila have the same foundation that the Western civilization has its foundations. Because Western civilization is founded upon the Greek philosophy, upon the writings of Aristotle, the writings of Plato. Right? That's what Western civilization is actually founded upon. So when they saw that in Islam, when they see and look at Islamic history, they see that what happened in Islamic history is that foreign influences came into the Muslims, and those foreign influences actually came from the Greeks. Because Kalam, al-Kalam, is actually from the Greeks. The speech about Allah, His names, His attributes, using the language of Aristotle, bodies and actions, all of that is from the Greek philosophers. So they have an affinity to the groups of Kalam. This is why when these people, these Orientalists and these philosophers and these professors, when they try to speak about Islam, they always raise the Ahlul Kalam, They put the Ahlul Kalam like this and they say these were the people who are upon the truth in Islam. They want to promote the Ahlul Kalam. And as for the people of Hadith and the people of Athar and the Imams of the Salaf, that these were backward, these call to stagnation, these call to so on and so forth. And that's the reason why they take that approach. Why? Because they recognize the Mu'tazila are taking from the same spring and foundations. That's why they will support the Ash'aris. That's why they will support the Mu'tazila. That's why they will support all of these groups, because they see a connection between them. Also, you see that many of these professors who write, a lot of them are Christians, and Christian theology, as I said to you, that amongst the Christians there were already the Jahmiyyah before Islam even came. Because amongst the Christians were those who are speaking about Allah's names and attributes, just like Jahm bin Safwan and Ja'd bin Dirham and the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. You will find books of these people 200-300 years before Islam. I will give you a name. A name of a person called Augustine. Augustine of Hippo, a place called Hippo in the Middle East. This was a great scholar of the Christians. To us, in retrospect, he was nothing but a Jahmi Mu'tazili. Why? Because when you look at how he's speaking about Allah, Allah does not have a body, Allah does not have accidents, Allah is not subject to time, Allah does not have a location. Where have we read this before? We've read it in the books of the Ash'aris. We read it in the books of the Mu'tazila. Where did this come from? So the Christians likewise, because they've inherited the idea of speaking about Allah from the Greek philosophers, from the Jewish Christians affected by that, they have an idea of Allah and monotheism, right? So they promote the Mu'tazila for that very same reason. Why? Because it identifies with their idea or their idea of belief in Allah. And then in turn, they will treat Ahlul Sunnah to be anthropomorphists. That's what you will find in their writings, in the journals, in the studies, in the universities. That's what they will teach. The Ahlul Sunnah are the Mushabbiha. And as for the Mu'tazila and the Asha'ira, they are the true monotheists. And that's because those Christians who you find studying Islam, the Christians have already been poisoned by the idea of divinity from Aristotle. Allah is not a body, Allah is not in a direction, Allah is not in a place, Allah is not bound by time. All this comes from Aristotle. So for that reason, that's why they promote the Mu'tazila and the Asha'ira, and they treat Ahlul Sunnah as being backward. And all of that is from the angle really is to prevent the Muslims from their religion. It's got nothing to do with advancement. It's got nothing to do with progression. Nothing to do with the scientific understanding. It's to undermine the Muslims, to cause confusion, and to perpetuate that falsehood.
Isn't it true that most of the Muslim scholars were Mu'tazilis, like Ibn Sina and these scientists? They were all deviant sects.
Many of these people who are claimed to be Islamic scientists or Muslim scientists, the vast majority of them were upon ilhad. A lot of them were upon ilhad. Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd likewise was upon the way of the. They had aspects to them where they were affected by that kalam or by that falsafa, and so we have to be careful when we see a lot of these ignorant Muslims trying to impress upon the non-Muslims, saying that Islam and science and this and whatever and this and whatever and trying to make it look as if we can make Islam look good, because there were Muslim scholars who were advanced in biology and this or whatever. This is like a defeatist type of mentality. In fact, it's the same thing. We are seeing the same thing in that time, like the Jahmi and the Mu'tazila. They felt that they need to argue with these people using their language and their philosophy. Why? Because it was supposed to be the science of the day. And if we don't agree with that, we are seen to be backward. The same thing that we are seeing now. These Muslims, they want to make Islam look good. And what are they doing? They're trying to follow the same standards that if you speak about science and nature and this, you are advanced and clever and intelligent. So if we can impress the same thing upon the non-Muslims, maybe they'll see Islam in the same light. This is batil. This is not the way of calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the way that Abdul Majid az-Zindani, this man, this Ikhwani from Yemen, that's what he's upon. This is what he's upon. It's the way of the Mu'tazila, the way of the Mubtadi'ah. This is not from our way. And this contains, again, it's a type of poison. It's a type of poison. This is not the way that the messengers called to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, this will be elaborated upon in tomorrow's lesson, inshallah ta'ala. Any other questions on the topic, inshallah?
A small question, inshallah. I see that it seems that there's a relationship between the Ash'ari and the Sufis.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand the reason, but it seems probably maybe you could shed some light on that.
Okay, the question was, is there a connection between the Ash'ari and the Sufis? And the answer to that is, when we look at the Ash'ari, we see that we have to distinguish between the early Ash'aris and the later Ash'aris who came afterwards. So I mean here that we distinguish between al-Ash'ari himself and some of the early students, which are basically in the 4th century. Okay. The ones who came afterwards, in the 5th and the 6th century, like al-Ghazali, al-Razi, then they incorporated things into the Ash'ari madhab, right? That Ash'ari himself was not upon. Ash'ari was, Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari was not upon tasawwuf, and he was not upon the philosophical mysticism that these people brought afterwards. But anyway, to help explain how that came about, in the 2nd century, around 100 Hijrah, we mentioned how al-Kalam came, right? Al-Kalam came into the Ummah. So this now was speaking about Allah, His names, His attributes, using this language of Allah is not a body, Allah is not an attribute, Allah is not in a place, and all of this, and then trying to make ta'weel of the Book of Allah and whatever. At the same time, there was something else which occurred. This tasawwuf, this Sufism, initially when it began in, or its roots began in Basra, around the same time, at the time of the Tabi'een. But when it initially began, it began as something where some of the people in that time, they had an excessive fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this excessive fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes they had an exceptional level of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So some of them would faint when the Qur'an was recited, and some of them would, and so really this thing wasn't really found amongst the Sahaba. But it began as something like this, something small, as like an excessiveness or exaggeration, or it wasn't evil in and of itself necessarily, but it began by being something more and additional to what was found amongst the Sahaba. This is where its roots really began, and Ibn Taymiyyah mentions this in his works, that this is where it really began, this tasawwuf. From that point onwards, it began to grow and move into other things. And then as time went on, when we passed through the centuries, there was a merging. So Kalam, al-Kalam now merged with tasawwuf. Right? So people who delve into Kalam, they would also, tasawwuf would be part and parcel of it. Likewise, they had this philosophical mysticism that would come in afterwards, by which the Batiniyah came along in the 4th century, and they brought their philosophical mysticism, basically, which means that there's a type of knowledge we can gain by spiritual exercise, which we can't get from revelation. This is like a philosophical mysticism. There's mystic knowledge, secret knowledge. We have exercises, mystic practices. Through that, we get knowledge that we can't get from revelation. Right? So that when that appeared in the Ummah, this also began, like people like Razi and Ghazali, they brought this element into it as well. So what we saw then by the 5th, 6th, 7th century, what they originally took from al-Ash'ari himself, they basically butchered it, doctored it, added to it, mixed things, merged it, and it became completely different to what al-Ash'ari himself was upon. Right? So this is why the Ash'ari school of thought, when we see Ash'arism, we see that they are Ahlul Kalam, in terms of how they speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are Mutasawwifa, like an excessive, exaggerated form of Sufism. They have mystical philosophy with them as well, and also Wahdatul Wujud, this belief in Allah's one, everything in the creation is just one. All of these things entered into them. And but al-Ash'ari himself is free and innocent of that. He died whilst he was upon the way of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, and so he's innocent and free from these people who ascribe themselves to al-Ash'ari. They have no connection to al-Ash'ari. It's just a name. It's a false ascription. These people are Jahmiyyah, Zanadika, and they are free from al-Ash'ari. Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Who's what? Sorry, I didn't catch the. You mean Qadiriyya, Tijaniyya, you mean the Sufi orders? Ah. What the brother is referring to, from what I could catch from the question, is that these people who say that I'm from the Qadiriyya, I'm from the Tijaniyya, I'm from the, and he's referring to the Sufi tariqas, or the ways and the paths, the Sufi tariqas and the ways and the paths. And what this is referring to is that the same people we are speaking of, the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya, what happened is, in fact, what this is what they say, that we are Ash'ari in Aqeedah, we are, say for example, Hanafi in fiqh or Maliki in fiqh, and we are, Tijaniyya or Qadiriyya in tariqah, right? So they have al-Kalam, and then they have taqleed, and then they have an innovated form of tasawwuf. So when you hear these words that we are Naqshbandiyya or Tijaniyya or whatever, then this is another level of innovation that these people have, in which they claim that the only way you can achieve salvation and nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through what they call these chains and these tariqas. Okay, you cannot achieve salvation unless you follow these tariqas and these ways. And these tariqas and these ways give you forms of worship and practices and mystical and spiritual cleansing, and you cannot approach Allah except by way of these tariqas. So this is what the brother is referring to, that when these people say I'm Qadri, I'm Tijani, I'm Shadili, I'm so on and so forth, then he's referring to these people. Now historically, many of these people, they ascribe themselves to, some of them are innocent and free of these people like Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah, but many of them whom they ascribe to themselves were upon deviation. Like Ibn Arabi, for example, Ibn Arabi and the many others historically, At-Tilmisani. Many of these people were upon ilhad and zandaqa, these people were upon. And, so this is part and parcel of the mystical, the thing that we mentioned before, and tasawwuf and kalam. So alhamdulillah, in Islam, you achieve salvation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by what? By iman and taqwa. That's what we know in Islam. If you have iman and taqwa, then this is what brings you salvation. This is what brings you walaya to Allah. You are a wali of Allah if you have iman and taqwa. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. Those who believe and those who have taqwa. Any Muslim, any believer who brings iman, the iman, meaning the iman that the Sahaba were upon, Allah, His books, His angels, His messengers, last day, and all the affairs of belief related to that, His names, His attributes, and so on and so forth. You bring that iman upon what the Sahaba were upon, and you practice taqwa. Taqwa is to put a barrier between yourself and Allah's punishment by doing what He commanded and keeping away from what He prohibited. Simple. This is simple. Deen of Islam is simple. This is taqwa. Taqwa means to put between yourself and Allah, His punishment, a barrier. What is that barrier? Do what He commanded, keep away from what He prohibited. This is taqwa. So if you bring iman and you bring taqwa, you are a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single believer, he is a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no special, wali is someone who dresses in a certain way, or he wears a green turban, or he walks in a certain way, or he can't be approached directly. He needs the, high people who will come and speak to him on your behalf because you're too lowly, to speak to him. There's no such thing in Islam. If you have iman and taqwa, you are a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The difference in your walaya, your friendship with Allah, is based upon how much iman and how much taqwa you bring. The more iman you have, the more detailed that iman, the more taqwa you have, the greater wali of Allah you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the Sahaba are the greatest awliya of Allah in this ummah. And so, then who is like them, he's like them, and so on and so forth. So in Islam, there is no such thing as a tariqah or as some special walaya you have to give to a person. Rather, Allah has said in the Qur'an, as we said, that every believer is a wali of Allah, it is simple iman and taqwa. So this is what we have with Ahlul Sunnah. And anyone who wants to refer more on this, there is an excellent book by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. It is called The Criterion, Al-Furqan, Bayna Awliya al-Rahman wa Awliya al-Shaytan. The criterion between the allies and the friends of Ar-Rahman and the allies and friends of Ash-Shaytan. And in this book he clarifies the reality of these people who claim these tariqas and who claim to have access to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the so-called miracles and the so-called things that they bring, which are just from the shaitan and which shaitan aids them upon. So refer to that book. It is available in English, I believe. It is an excellent book which clarifies this topic, inshallah ta'ala. Any more questions on today's topic specifically?
What's the correct view of the idea that Allah is not limited by time, and that Allah Himself created time, He's not limited by time?
Okay, this is a good question. The statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not limited by time and Allah Himself created time, what is the correct view regarding this statement? First of all, we should say that this idea, first of all, this phrase or this statement, we do not find it in the Qur'an, we do not find it in the Sunnah, we do not find it from the companions, we do not find any of the Imams of the Salaf mention the likes of this statement, that Allah is not confined by time. Rather, the origin of this kalam, the origin of this speech actually comes from Aristotle in his book Metaphysics. So the statement that Allah is not confined by space and nor confined by time is something that has its origin in the books of Aristotle. So as we said, when this ul-Kalam entered into the Muslims, and the Muslims began to speak about Allah, His names, His attributes, on the basis of that same language, they then began to speak about Allah in the same way, which is why that when you go to Aristotle's book, it's called Metaphysics 12. Metaphysics 12. When you read that book and you see how this man is describing Allah, then you pick up the books of the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazila, you will be astounded. You will be astounded. Because he's saying Allah is not confined by space, not by time, He's not an arad, He's not a jism, He's not this, He's not whatever. And then you see in the books of the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazila, Allah is not a jism, not in a hayyiz, not in makan, not in a place, not in a direction, not in this, not confined by time. It's all the same thing. But as for where do we stand Islamically speaking, first of all we believe, as Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh explains in his Aqeedah al-Wasitiyah and other than that we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of time. Allah creates time. Allah is the creator of all time. And what do we mean by time? Now this is a question. Time is of two types. What we refer to as time is of two types. The first one is the time by the motion of the planets. The planets turn round, the sun, the moon. So this is time. Allah created that time. Right? Allah created that time. So the days, the years that we have, Allah clearly created the heavens and the earth. So this time is created. However, we see in the hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth. He wrote down the decrees 50,000 years before He created the heavens and the earth. This proves that there is another measurement of time before the creation of the heavens and the earth. Right? That's very clear from the hadith. And likewise, okay, so we see that in the Sunnah, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that indeed Allah wrote the decrees, the maqadir, 50,000 years before He created the heavens and the earth. Okay, this proves now that there is a measurement of time. There's a measurement of time before the creation of this universe, of this creation. Okay. Why do these people say that Allah is not confined by time? What is the intent behind this statement? This will become clear to us when we look at the other statement, Allah is not confined by space. What do they mean by this? They mean to deny Allah is above the throne. So when they say Allah is not confined by space, what they mean, Allah is not above the seven heavens. In the same way, when they say Allah is not confined by time, what do they mean by this? They mean by this that Allah does not have actions which are tied to His will. This is the intent behind this statement. Allah is not confined by space. What you're trying to say to us really, Allah is not above the heaven. Why? Because according to Aristotle, if something is in a direction, it must be in a place. If something is in a place, it must be occupying that space. If it's occupying a space, it must be a body. Therefore it's created. This is the deen of al-Kalam. So when they say Allah is not in space, that's what they really mean. Allah is not above the seven heavens. Likewise, when they say Allah is not confined by time, it's an ambiguous statement. What they really mean is Allah did not create the seven heavens and then make istiwa upon the arsh. That's what they mean. As in an event, they call it an event. An event cannot take place with Allah, meaning that Allah can't not do something and then do something that He didn't do before. Why? Because this is now being confined by time. That's what they really mean. So what we say is that when you say that Allah is not confined by time, it's an ambiguous statement. We say, first of all, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the creator of time. He created the heavens and the earth. And even whatever time existed before that, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, that the 50,000 years before He created the heavens and earth, that measurement is a measurement different to the heavens, of this heavens and earth. And Allah knows best, maybe it is on account of motions of bodies that were created before that. This is what Ibn Taymiyyah says in Dar at-Ta'arud, al-Aql wal-Naql. So that's one thing. The second thing we say on top of that is that Allah is one who acts as and when He pleases. He has actions as and when He pleases according to His will. So when Allah wills, He will speak. When Allah wills, He will act. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He spoke to Adam alayhi salam. Likewise, Allah spoke to Musa alayhi salam. Likewise, Allah spoke to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Likewise, Allah will speak on Yawm al-Qiyamah. All of these acts of Allah, or the statements of Allah, are different statements of Allah. They occur in succession, meaning they occur after each other. That does not mean that Allah is confined by time. It doesn't mean that Allah is confined by time. Because these are two separate things. That Allah is someone who can speak as and when He wills and act as and when He wills is completely separate to the issue of time. Right? It does not mean that because Allah acts and speaks, He must be confined by time. This is a false principle. This is why in the Sharia we see there are many narrations in which we see that Allah is speaking and acting even though it is mentioned in relation to the time that we know of. Because Allah is one who can speak as and when He wills. If Allah speaks as and when He wills, that means He can speak to us. And from our point of view, we can see that Allah spoke to the angels at Fajr, He will speak to the angels at Asr. And likewise, all the other narrations that we see in the Sunnah, we treat them likewise. This does not mean that Allah is now confined by time and so on and so forth. This is false. What they really mean by that statement is to deny that Allah has actions and speech which is tied to His will. That's what they really intend by that statement. So we do not use that statement. We do not say it. It is ambiguous. It is intended to deny Allah's actions. So we don't use that statement.
So when they speak about accidents, this ties into what you just said.
Yeah, that's what they mean. When they say that Allah is not a body, nor is He an accident, nor can He have accidents within Him. What they mean by this is Allah does not speak when He wills. That's why they said the Qur'an is created. This is why they said that the Qur'an is created. Because if Allah speaks, He spoke something He never spoke before. Now this is a change. Allah can't be subject to change. So the Qur'an can't be the speech of Allah because it signifies change. That's what they mean by accidents. Now, okay, inshallah, we conclude our lesson today then, so that we will continue tomorrow. We will build upon today's lesson. Today was just really a platform. Tomorrow is the actual real content of the lesson, inshallah. We will deal with that tomorrow. وجزاكم الله خيرا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So to continue with the second session in the series, we mentioned in yesterday's lesson, we said that this talk will be in 4 sections or 4 parts. We covered 2 parts yesterday. We covered the introduction, the muqaddimah. In this muqaddimah we mentioned 5 or 6 principles that were important for us to keep in mind and remember as we proceed through the rest of the lecture. From them were that Salafiyyah is Islam, Salafiyyah is the Sunnah is Islam, all of this is the same. And that when we say that there is an ideological attack against Salafiyyah, we are speaking about the Islam that was revealed upon the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and which the companions adhere to. We mentioned also the issue of usul and furu'. We covered that issue yesterday about this incorrect distinction that usul are just matters of belief and furu' are just matters of action. This is incorrect. We also mentioned the importance of the connection between Aqeedah and Manhaj, that these two are integrally tied like this, and mistakes in one are a reflection of mistakes in the other, and vice versa. We also mentioned that ideas and beliefs and principles which are innovated, that people bring, that they tend to last for a very long time. They live longer than men. They live for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And the implication of this was that the Salaf, they recognized this and the implications of this upon the religion, upon the deen of Islam. Because this is exactly what happened to the Jews and the Christians, to those who received revelation previously, and their revelation was changed and altered and distorted. Why? Because those people never stood to defend the truth and to defend the revelation. So that was the implication of that particular point. We also mentioned that innovation tends to occur in waves, that you have an initial bid'ah which is introduced into the ummah, and then maybe sometime afterwards there's a variation of that bid'ah, then sometime afterwards there's another variation of that bid'ah. This is the nature of bid'ah. It comes in waves. We also spoke about the issue of how we have to accept the criticism of the scholars. This is point number 6. That when we take all of the scholars collectively together of Ahlus Sunnah in any given time or age or era, we see that between them as a whole, that indeed, walhamdulillah, they have fulfilled the trust that Allah placed upon them, which is to clarify the truth, to make the truth clear, which means to make the falsehood clear likewise. So we see that amongst them, that they will refute the people of kufr and shirk, and likewise all the various types of innovation. And so in our time, what we intended by this point was that in our time, when we take all of the ulama together, from the scholars of Ahlus Sunnah, like Shaykh al-Albani, Shaykh Ibn Baz, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, Shaykh Muqbil, Shaykh Rabi', and all the other mashayikh, we see that between themselves, walhamdulillah, they have refuted the communists, the Jews, the Christians, and likewise the Rafida, the Shia, the Murjia, the Khawarij, the Qadariyah, the Jahmiyyah, the Mu'tazila, and so on and so forth. And likewise between themselves, they have refuted figureheads by name from the leading figureheads of innovation. But that does not mean that, it doesn't mean that there has to be an ijma or an agreement between all of these scholars before we can say that such and such individual, that one of them has criticized, or 2 of them have criticized, or 3 of them have criticized, before we can say that it's acceptable. So that was the 6 points. And then we went on to part 2, which was to look at ul-Kalam, and the intention behind this was to lay this as a foundation for today's session. So we said that in the 2nd century after Hijrah, there was a poison that came into the ummah. This poison was a poison that was transmitted through the Jews and the Christians and the Sabaean star worshippers. It came through them to individuals like Ja'ad bin Dirham and Jaham bin Safwan. And what this was is that they began to speak about Allah, His names, His attributes, in a way that these nations had been speaking about Allah. And they themselves had taken this from the writings of Aristotle. So then we saw that this slogan or this word came into the ummah, Allah is not a jism. Allah is not a jism. This is an innovated slogan. And this they claim that this is Tawheed. This is the Tawheed which is intended in the Qur'an. And so from this we saw that they began to deny Allah is above the throne, began to deny that Allah has attributes, began to deny that Allah has names, began to deny that Allah will be seen in the hereafter, began to deny that Allah made istiwa over his arsh. They began to deny that Allah speaks, or that the Qur'an is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of this slogan that which was brought into the ummah, then they denied all of these affairs which are established in the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And then around this innovation and this slogan, Allah is not a jism, they then invented other principles and other ideas which would allow them or justify for them to invalidate the ahadith or invalidate the verses of the Qur'an, which clashed with their innovation. So we mentioned some of them yesterday. We said that from those innovations they introduced were things like to distinguish between the mutawatir and the ahadith. So the mutawatir is qat'i and the ahad hadith are dhanni. So the mutawatir hadith is definitive knowledge, but the ahadith are just speculative knowledge. We're not required to have iman in them or to have aqeedah in them. It would be sinful because we are following speculation. Right? And what they really intended was to nullify the narrations which mention Allah will descend to the lowest heaven and Allah's attributes which are mentioned in the Sunnah. Likewise, they began to say in the Qur'an there are verses which are haqiqiyah, and those which are majaz, allegorical. So they introduced this principle for the same purpose, to claim that the verses in the Qur'an that mention Allah's names and attributes, that they're not really attributes of Allah, they are something else. They're just allegories and metaphors and so on and so forth. Likewise, they divided the religion into usul and furu, as we mentioned. They also began to play with definitions of words and change them from their original Arabic, true Arabic meanings, and give them the philosophical meanings that they found from the nations outside of Islam. And likewise, ta'wil, they invented ta'wil, and likewise they invented tafweed. So all of this we saw, we intended by this to show that when a bid'ah enters into the religion, then it has an infrastructure built around it to support and justify and to propagate this innovation. And then we also said that we see that this innovation, it changes form. So we said the Jahmiyyah came along and they wanted to say Allah is not above the throne. So when this batil was made clear by the Imams of the Salaf, then another group came later on and they said, we accept that Allah is above his throne, but he is not confined in a space. And their intention was the same as the first people who came before them 100, 120, 130 years before. Likewise, the Jahmiyyah said at the beginning of the 2nd century, the Qur'an is created. So when the Imams of the Salaf refuted this saying and declared anyone who said it to be a kafir, then another group came along 150 years afterwards, 120 years afterwards, and they said, the Qur'an, which is Allah's speech, which is with Allah, we believe it is the speech of Allah, not created. And what they really meant, that it is just a meaning. It is not actual speech. And as for this Qur'an that we recite and that we memorize in our hearts and that we write with our pens and that we have, this Qur'an is created. So they began to try and play words and tricks and so this is the nature of bid'ah. So we saw the Jahmiyyah come along, then the Mu'tazila changed the bid'ah slightly, then the Kullabiyah changed the bid'ah slightly, then the Ash'ariyah changed the bid'ah slightly. It's the same bid'ah, but just using different words and try to play deception with words and to conceal the reality of that bid'ah. So now, pay attention to this speech of Al-Hafiz Abdul Ghani Al-Maqdisi, rahimahullah. I mentioned this yesterday, but I didn't bring the full quote. Today I will bring you the full quote. So look at this beautiful statement. He says, وَأْلَمْ رَحِمَكَ اللَّهِ, know, may Allah have mercy upon you, that Islam and its people are attacked by way of 3 groups. One group, the first group, are those who denied the ahadith and they rejected the narrators of those ahadith which mentioned Allah's attributes. So they came along and they said, we don't accept these ahadith, we reject them outright. And we reject the narrators of these ahadith, we reject them outright. He says, فَهَؤُلَاءِ أَشَدُّ ضَرَرًا عَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ وَأَهْلِهِ مِنَ الْكُفَّارِ. These people are more harmful to Islam and its people than the kuffar. Why? Because these people, when they bring this false position, they are undermining the very belief in Allah, His attributes. They are stripping from the hearts of the people the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by way of this position. But this is only the first group. This is the first group. He says, the second group, وَأُخْرَى قَالُوا بِصِحَّتِهَا وَقُبُولِهَا ثُمَّ تَأَوَّلُوهَا فَهَؤُلَاءِ أَعْظَمُ ضَرَرًا عَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ وَأَهْلِهِ مِنَ الطَّائِفَةِ الْأُولَى. So he says, then a second group came along, and they said, we accept these ahadith are correct. We accept they are correct. And we accept them. We make qabul of these narrations. We don't deny them. But then they began to make ta'weel of these ahadith. So Allah descending to the lowest heaven is not Allah descending, it's His mercy which descends. And likewise, all of the other attributes which mention the seeing of Allah's face and the other attributes, so they began to make ta'weel and interpret them in a way which is wrong. So he said, these people are more harmful upon Islam and its people than the first group, about whom he said, they are more harmful to Islam and its people than the kuffar. Then he said, then there is a third group, a third one who came. وَالثَّالِثَ جَانَبُ الْقَوْلَيْنَ الْأَوَّلَيْنِ. This third group came and they avoided the first two sayings. They didn't hold the first two sayings. But they began to claim وَأَخَذُوا بِزَعْمِهِمْ يُنَزِّهُونَ or يَنزِهُونَ, that they claim that we are purifying Allah of defects. We are removing defects from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so what he's alluding to is that these people are saying that the verses in the Qur'an and the hadith, they don't really establish attributes for Allah. We don't know what the meanings are. Only Allah knows best. And we are just purifying Allah from defects. He says, وَهُمْ يَكْذِبُونَ, but they are lying. He says, so these people وَكَانُوا أَعْظَمُ ضَرَرًا مِنَ الطَّائِفَتَيْنِ الْأَوَّلَيْنِ. This group is more harmful than the first two groups. Right, so this is by Al-Hafiz Abdul Ghani Al-Maqdisi rahimahullah in his book Al-Iqtisād fil I'tiqād, right at the very end of this book. This reminds me of a statement of one of the Salaf which is similar to this. He said, Al-Asha'ira ashaddu alayna min al-Mu'tazila. The Ash'aris are more severe upon us, they're more hard upon us than the Mu'tazila. وَالْمُعْتَزِلَةِ أَشَدُّ عَلَيْنَا مِنَ الْجَهْمِيَّةِ. And the Mu'tazila in turn are more hard and severe upon us than the Jahmiyyah. وَالْجَهْمِيَّةِ أَشَدُّ عَلَيْنَا مِنَ الْيَهُودِ وَالنَّصَارَى. Or I think he said مِنَ الْكُفَّارِ. And that the Jahmiyyah in turn are more harmful upon us than the Jews or the Christians. Or maybe he said the kuffar, one of those two. So you see from this that every time a group comes along and they become more subtle and deceptive and hidden and employ this kind of deception in their bid'ah, then their enmity and their opposition and their harshness to the people of truth becomes even more severe. So from this, my dear brothers and sisters, this was just really something that will lead us now to part 3. So now we begin part 3, which there were 4 parts. This now is part 3. Now we are in a position, inshallah ta'ala, to understand the ideological attack in our time, in the 20th century, and in the past 10 years. So to introduce this topic, we say, first of all, that when we look at what happened to this ummah, we see that in the 4th century of Islam, we saw that this group came along who introduced grave worship into the ummah. These are the Batiniyya Ubaydiyya. These people came from Morocco, they moved across to Egypt. They were Ismaili Batinis. They believed, they had the ideas of the Shia. They worshipped Ali, or they would celebrate the birthdays of Ali, Hassan, Hussein, and the Messenger, alayhi salatu wasalam. And likewise, they would celebrate the birthday of their ruler. And these people, they brought this attachment to the graves. And this was the beginning of when the shirk entered into the ummah properly, when the people began to worship others besides Allah in a general sense, and it began to spread into the ummah. From that time, this continued. And as you know, we mentioned in the lesson this morning that there is a rule in Allah's creation. There are rules in Allah's creation Just like we see that there are rules that if you drop something, it will fall on the floor. This is a rule in Allah's creation. On this earth, it will fall on the floor. Just like there is a rule, if you put your hand in the fire, it will burn. So there are rules which we know from experience. But in the Sharia, Allah has informed us of the Sharia, the asbab, the ways and means that are found in the Sharia. From those asbab are that when you abandon tawheed, and when you abandon gratefulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah will make you face hunger and poverty and fear. This is the rule in Allah's creation. And we mentioned the ayah in the Qur'an, in Surah An-Nahl, in which Allah says, وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا قَرْيَةً كَانَتْ آمِنَةً مُطْمَئِنَّةً. Allah gives an example of the town or the city which was in peace and safety and security, and its sustenance would come to it from every place. Then he says, فَكَفَرَتْ بِأَنْعُمِ اللَّهِ. Then it rejected or was ungrateful for the favors of Allah. So then Allah says, فَأَذَاقَهَا اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ بِمَا كَانُوا يَصْنَعُونَ. So Allah made it to taste fear and hunger on account of what they used to do. Likewise, we see in a hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the nations are about to invite each other on top of you, just like a group of people invite each other to eat from a meal. And then the companion said that, will we be small in number that day? And the Messenger said, no, you will be large in number, but you will be like the scum that is upon the water of the ocean. And the Messenger said that Allah will remove from the hearts of your enemies their fear of you, and He will put into your hearts this weakness, this wahan. And so they said, what is this wahan? And he said, love of the world and fear of death. So from this, and there are many other narrations we can mention, but the point that we want to say is that when the shirk began to spread in the ummah, and when the most evil of the statements of Ahlul Bidah began to spread in the ummah, of ittihad, that Allah is in unison with people from His creation, or wahdatul wujud, that everything in existence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When all of this spread into the ummah, and this then signaled the removal of the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is when we saw, around 1700, 1800, the era of colonialism. This is when the European nations, they came along. They began to travel to the Muslim countries. They began to colonize them because they thought these people are backward and stupid. They don't know how to run their countries. Let us take their resources. Let us take their belongings. And let's basically enslave them. Steal their riches. This was the era of colonialism. So these nations, these Western nations, they traveled to Egypt, they traveled to the Far East, they traveled to India, and they began to make this attack against the Muslim lands. All of this is from the asbab shar'iyah. This is from the effects of what the people's hands have earned. So when this happened, and so eventually we see that in the 20th century, the Sufi Ottoman state, it abolished, it was finished. And so when all of this happened over these 100, 200 years, then there were some Muslims who came along and they looked at this whole situation. They looked at what's happened. And most of the people, these countries who were colonizing and going to these Muslim lands, they were like England, they were like capitalist countries. And so what these people saw is that when they saw the decline in the Muslim Ummah and the Sufi Ottoman, as they call it, the Khilafah, or the Sufi Ottoman state, it declined and it finished, then they looked at Russian communism. And Russian communism, or the Marxism or socialism, these people came along and they had made many revolutions in the 19th century. A revolution in France, and revolution in other countries in Europe. And they toppled the rulers, the kings and the queens, and they removed them. And they claimed that they established social justice. So this is what happened in Russia and other places. So they looked at the experience of these European nations, and they looked at what the philosophers had been writing, the philosophers who've been writing about socialism and Marxism and all these types of social change and bringing social justice and how to do this by revolution, by gathering the people together. And so they looked at all of these things. And then, when they try to deal with this situation, when they try to change this situation, they try to change it in a way, or they try to deal with this in a way, just like I mentioned yesterday in the lesson yesterday, that the al-Kalam try to defend Islam, but by using the concepts of the very people they were trying to debate or argue with. So in the same way, there was a group of thinkers who came along in the 20th century. These people were affected, their background. If you look at the background of these people, in fact I'll mention their names now. Hassan al-Banna, Mawdudi, Abu A'la Mawdudi, Sayyid Qutb, Taqiyuddin al-Nabahani, and there are many others. But these four, they stick out for a reason. So these people came along, and when we look in their background, these people in the early part of their lives, they were actually Marxists, they were communists, they were Ba'athists, they were socialists. They had been reading the books of these philosophers for 10, 15 years of their lives. So then when they came to Islam, or when they tried to bring their changes into Islam, that influence and that poison, this fikr, this is what we call, this is fikr, it came into their writings, it came into their methodologies, it came into their programs. And so what we saw then, what they did is that the result of this is that there were two major slogans. Just like the Ahlul Kalam we said earlier on, they brought a slogan, Allah is not a jism. And around this slogan, they built many other principles. So in the 20th century, there were two slogans that came to be as a result of this fikr that entered into the ummah through these thinkers. They're not scholars, they are thinkers. So what are these two slogans? The first one is Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah. I'll explain what this means in a minute. The second one is a principle to do with unity, al-Jama'ah, the Jama'ah, the unity, the Jama'ah. What do they mean by the first principle? Jahiliyyah. What they meant by this is that we see that there is no Islam present upon the face of this earth. Why? Because there is no nation, no Muslim nation present which establishes the rule of Allah. So therefore we see that everything in all the Muslim lands, or where there are supposed to be Muslims, it is oppression, it is injustice, there's no social justice, and so this means that Islam has disappeared from the face of this earth. So this is one idea, keep that in mind. Jahiliyyah, this is Sayyid Qutb. On the other side we see this idea of unity and Jama'ah, that now we need to collectively work together and to bring everybody together. Just like the communists and the socialists and the Marxists were able to bring thousands and hundreds of thousands of people together and make their revolutions. We need to do the same thing. We need to bring the people together into a jama'ah. And when they use the word jama'ah, they don't use the word jama'ah as the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used the word jama'ah. They mean a different type of innovated jama'ah. And so they came along, and the person who brought this is Hassan al-Banna. So he brought a slogan, a principle. What is this principle? This principle is نتعاون فيما اتفقنا عليه ويعذر بعضنا بعضا فيما اختلفنا فيه. That we will cooperate with each other in those things that we agree with each other. And those things in which we disagree, we will pardon each other for that. We will overlook and we will ignore those things. What he means by this is that what is the least common thing that every single Muslim agrees upon? It is La ilaha illallah, just the statement La ilaha illallah. So if you say La ilaha illallah, we can cooperate with you. So if you are a Rafidi Shi'i, we can cooperate with you. You can come and join us. If you are a Jahmi who denies Allah's names and attributes, you say La ilaha illallah, you can join with us. If you are a Sufi, a Mu'tazili, Qadari, Ittihadi, Hululi, everything, no problem. As long as you say La ilaha illallah, let's come together and we can work together and we can, move ahead and try to work to restore the Khilafah. Because this is the ultimate goal, the Khilafah. So now we have two branches. We have one branch which is using the slogan, Jahiliyyah. There is no Islam on the face of this earth. This is batil. Because the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith, in an authentic hadith, there will never cease to be لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق. There will never cease to be a group from my ummah manifestly upon the truth. They will not be harmed by those who leave them or who abandon them or who oppose them up until the hour is established. This shows that Islam will be established. Islam will be present. And there will be Muslims upon the truth in every single age and era. Whereas what this individual, Sayyid Qutb, who brought this idea, he was trying to say, is that there is no Muslim on the face of this earth. Apart from himself, of course, and his few followers, that they're the only believers. As for everyone else, they are apostates. Even the mu'adhins who make adhan in the masajid, they are apostates. Why? Because they have nifaq, they contradict what they express and what they say. So now, around this idea of jahiliyyah, just like I said to you yesterday, that when the Jahmiyyah brought the slogan, Allah is not a jism, they then began to invent other principles, other ideas to support that original innovation. So what did we see then from this branch, the branch of Jahiliyyah? What did we see? Number one, this word al-Hakimiyyah. Al-Hakimiyyah. What did they mean? What do they mean by this? They wanted to make this issue of rulership and justice to be the most fundamental aspect of Tawheed. Because through that, they wanted to make takfir of the whole ummah. And through that, make that a justification for working with revolutions and rebellions and coups and assassinations to establish the Islamic State as they claimed. So we see this slogan, al-Hakimiyyah. Likewise, we see them make it a part of Tawheed, separately, Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah. This is what all of that issue was about. This is what they intended by this. Likewise, they began to bring some shubahat. They said obedience to the ruler is only when he is obeying Allah and the Messenger, or when he's establishing the Sharia 100%. So by this they wanted to abolish the narrations in the Sunnah, which mention that even if he beats your back and takes your wealth, then still obey him. Still obey him. Because this is from the usul of Ahlul Sunnah. So they began to bring these shubuhat and these false principles to invalidate the Sunnah. Just like the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila, when they came, they began to bring these false principles to invalidate the Sunnah. And likewise, they began to say that we know that from the usul of the Sunnah is that when you advise a ruler, there are certain ways that you follow. If you can, you take him by the hand and you advise him between that which is between you and him. You don't publicize it all over the place. And so what they began to do is they opposed this asl. And then they began to write about the rulers' faults and mistakes and spread them and mobilize the people against them and so on and so forth. And then they began to justify this. Likewise, they began to make mistakes in the issues of takfir. Likewise, the issue of jihad. They corrupted and polluted the idea or the understanding of jihad in the Sharia. So what they took is the ideas of the socialists, Marxists and communists of rebellions and revolutions to establish the Sharia as they claimed, and they made this to be the idea of jihad in the Sharia. And this is incorrect, this is batil, this is totally incorrect. And likewise, they began to speak about siyasa and politics. So, in the Sharia, the meaning of siyasa is that the ruler and the scholar, the rulers and the scholars, that they take affairs, they look after the affairs of the state. So to have the Sharia politics, the state must exist first. And it is for the rulers and the scholars to take part in the siyasa. But they brought a new understanding of siyasa, of fiqh al-waqi', understanding the state of affairs, current affairs, politics. And what does this involve? It involves looking at the rulers, finding their faults, reading the newspapers of the disbelievers and their reports, spreading articles, putting them into the Muslim lands, making them lose attachment from the scholars and the rulers, to hate them, to mobilize them against them. This then is the siyasa to them, a false understanding of siyasa. So the point from all of this is, look at the similarity in how they brought a slogan, an innovated idea, after being affected by people outside of Islam. And then in order to support that innovation, they then brought many other false usul. So this is one branch, Jahiliyyah and Hakimiyyah and Takfir and revolution and so on and so forth. The other branch, which is really the focus of our talk today, is the side of Hassan al-Banna, where he brought this principle that let us agree in that which we are, let us unite in that which we agree upon, and let us forgive each other and pardon each other in that which we disagree upon. What does this mean? What is the implication of this? What is the implication of this? In fact, there was one point I forgot to make, which is, and this is really important for you to understand, which is that if we take all of the books of the Salaf written in the 2nd century Hijrah to the 15th century Hijrah today, we took every single one of those books that the scholars of the Sunnah wrote to defend the religion, to defend Sunnah, to defend Salafiyyah, to defend the Aqeedah, and we tried to look at what are the constantly repeated things that are mentioned over and over and over and over again. What are the core themes and what are the most things which are repeated again and again and again? We see that we can say basically that there are 7 things, 7 core topics or areas that you will never fail to see repeated again and again and again and again, which means to us that these are from the most important fundamental usul of our religion. So what are these 7 things? We see, first of all, a clarification of the correct Aqeedah. Clarification of the correct Aqeedah. This is something that we will not fail to see in all of these books. That's number 1. Number 2, we see them stressing the importance of sticking to the Sunnah. The importance of the Sunnah. We will never fail to see this in all of these books. In all of these books, we'll never fail to see that. Thirdly, we will see the advice to stick to the manhaj of the Salaf. Follow the way of the Salaf. Stick to the Sahaba. Stick to the Sahaba. Stick to the Sahaba. Stick to the Tabi'een. Stick to the Imams. Stick to the way of those who came before us. Stick to the way of the Salaf. We see again and again and again and again and again. Fourthly, we see to abandon all newly introduced things into the religion. To abandon them. To disassociate from them and to leave them. That's the 4th principle that we see again and again and again and again. 5th principle is to abandon innovation and its people. So you abandon innovation, but then you abandon innovation and its people. And you warn from them. That's number 5. Number 6 is to not rebel against the rulers who may be tyrannical and to have patience upon them. This we will find in all of the books of Aqeedah. And finally, number 7, luzumul jama'ah, to stick to the jama'ah, to be united upon the Sunnah, not to make iftiraq, not to separate, not to divide. These things you will find repeated over and over and over again. Now, what does this show to us? This shows to us that these affairs are such an established part of Islam that if someone comes along and he opposes any one of these, we know straight away that this man is a deviant innovator who has chosen misguidance. Because there is no excuse. If you oppose the Aqeedah and you speak with the bid'ah of the Khawarij or the Murji'ah or the Rafida or the Qadariyah, these affairs have been made clear. These affairs have been made clear for centuries and centuries and centuries. How can you come along now in the 20th century and speak with any one of these bid'ahs? Likewise, how can you come along and say, we're not going to follow the Salaf, we're not going to follow the Sahaba, we're going to use our aql. So anyone who opposes these usul, we know straight away that this man is upon misguidance and deviation. So now, coming back to the issue, these 2 principles that we said, Jahiliyyah, and likewise on the other side, the issue of unity with everybody, with every group of innovation. What has happened here is that these 2 ideas have clashed and invalidated 2 of the most important usul of Ahlus Sunnah, and which we find in the books, which is number 1, how to deal with the rulers and their injustice and oppression, and number 2, how do we deal with the innovators, the rulers and the innovators. So 2 fundamental principles of the Sunnah have now been invalidated or have been opposed by way of this fikr. Okay, so we mentioned the ruler part. Now we're going to focus upon the issue of the Ahlul Bid'ah. And before we mention that as well, we should point out that look at this amazing thing. That when you look at all these people who are responsible for bringing this fikr into the ummah and clashing with these usul, you look at Hassan al-Banna, you look at Sayyid Qutb, you look at Mawdudi, you look at Taqiyuddin Nabhani. What are these people? These people are upon the Aqeedah of the Ash'aris. They deny Allah's attributes. They are upon the Aqeedah of the Mu'tazila. Nabhani denies al-Qadr. They are upon they are Ahlul Kalam. They are Ahlul Kalam. So these people are the descendants of those people in the time of the Salaf who brought Kalam into the Ummah. Ilmul Kalam. Those people, Jahm bin Safwan, Ja'd bin Dirham, Wasil bin Ata, Amr bin Ubaid, Bishr al-Marisi. Those are the people who brought that Kalam, that poison into the Ummah. Who are the people in the 20th century who brought this new poison, this fikr into the Ummah? They are the descendants of those people. Because these are Ash'aris, Sufis, Mufawwida, Ahlul Kalam, Mu'tazila. And this shows you the great slander and the lie that the Salafis and Ahlul Sunnah are the ones who are responsible for extremism and terrorism and violence and this false type of jihad. This is batil. Who brought this? It was these people. The Ash'aris, Sufis, Mufawwida, Mu'tazila. That's what these people are upon. These are the people who brought this into the Ummah. So what a great lie this is against the people of the Sunnah, that we brought this extremism and terrorism. Rather, it is from these people. And these people are the figureheads, Sufis, Ash'aris, Mu'tazila. So look at this connection with the people who came in the past, that they brought Kalam into the Ummah, and these people have brought fikr into the Ummah, by way of which they oppose the usul of Ahlul Sunnah regarding the rulers and the innovators. Okay, so now we want to focus on this principle of let us unite in that which we agree, and let us pardon and forgive each other in that which we disagree. So as I said in yesterday's lesson, that we have to look at innovation as like a rock that falls into the ocean, and then it sends ripples, it sends waves after waves, and it comes in waves. So we want to look at how there is a connection between the people who are being refuted today by the scholars, like Abu al-Hasan al-Ma'rabi and Ali Hassan al-Halabi. What is the connection between them and what they are expressing, and the innovation that was brought by Hassan al-Banna? So we say, first of all, that we treat these people into three waves. Let's say there are three waves. Just like with Ilmul Kalam, we had the Jahmiyyah, then the Mu'tazila, then the Kullabiyya, then the Ash'ariyya, and each of them, they inherited one from the other. And then they just made the principles a bit more subtle, a bit more hidden, a bit more sophisticated. So in the same way, we have Hassan al-Banna. Now this principle, ya Ikhwān, which says, let us unite, let us work and cooperate with each other based upon what we agree upon, and let us pardon each other with respect to what we disagree upon. Tell me, what is the implication of this principle? Can anyone tell me? What does this principle really mean? What is it really saying? We have many hands.
Saying like, let's be lenient and like forget about
Okay,
our errors, and let's like just to get along basically.
that's part of the answer. That's good, yeah.
To remove differences in Aqeedah.
Oh, sorry?
To remove any type of differences in Aqeedah.
That's part of the answer as well.
The shift and the innovation you guys are doing is okay.
That's part of the answer as well, yes. That basically, the matters of Aqeedah, we forget the differences, that to be soft and lenient with the people of deviation.
Let's compromise the haqq and unite on falsehood.
Yeah, compromise the truth, unite on falsehood. Anything else?
Get as much as
Sorry?
as many as people possible.
That's good. To get as many people together as possible. Why? Because remember, what is the purpose behind this? The purpose behind this is to follow the ways of those communists, Marxists, socialists in making revolutions. Let's follow their method. But to do that, we need to have as many people as possible. To have as many people as possible, we have to now push aside the differences in Aqeedah, because we need bodies. We need numbers. That's what they're really moving towards. Anyone else want to add to that? Say that again? That's, it's kind of in there, but it's not this. Yeah. That's the implication of that principle, yes. But what I'm getting towards really is that this principle, what does it mean? It means, there's a word, let's use the word abolition. To abolish something means to completely invalidate and to remove it. So what this principle means is the actual, to speak against falsehood and to expose falsehood, which is a principle in the Qur'an. Did not Allah in the Qur'an expose the falsehood of the Jews? Did He not refute the falsehood of the Christians? Did He not expose the falsehood of names like Fir'aun and Haman? And you know, to refute falsehood is a principle which is rooted in the Qur'an. The whole Qur'an is refutation of falsehood and its people. So by way of this principle, what it means is that we remain silent in the face of falsehood, and to criticize and refute bid'ah and kufr and shirk and ilhad, that this is totally abolished now. For this reason, you see, this man, he used to travel to Iran. Hassan al-Banna used to travel to Iran. The Shia, our brothers, they are upon naqa. This is his words, naqa. They are upon purity, like what the people of Sunnah are upon. He used to go and meet with their figureheads. Why? Because he wanted to bring them together and bring brotherhood and nearness. Why? Because the whole aim is to bring everybody together for other objectives. So what this principle means now is that which is established in the Qur'an and the Sunnah and the way of the Salaf, to warn from bid'ah and its people, to warn from deviation. And really, my dear brothers and sisters, this in essence is essentially a destruction of the religion. It is a destruction of the religion. Why? Because, let me give you an example. Let me illustrate to you. Sometimes we might have an innovation which in and of itself is extremely evil, okay? But in its effect, it is limited. But then we might have another innovation which is nowhere near as evil as the first one, but in its effect, it is destructive. So let me give you two examples. Let's say someone comes along, Abdullah comes along and he says, I believe the Qur'an is created. Or I believe that some of the Sahaba were, he speaks ill of some of the Sahaba. All right, no doubt this innovation is evil, it's wicked. In terms of its content, it is evil and wicked. Okay, so we understand that. But now let's say someone else comes along and he brings a principle like this principle of Hassan al-Banna, which is, let us cooperate with each other in that which we agree, and let us forgive and excuse each other in that which we disagree. Now he makes it a principle. Now this principle is spread in the ummah. What does this now mean? It means that those millions and millions of people who believe in shirk, or who believe that the companions were kuffar, or who believe that Allah is in every place, or who believe that Allah has no names or attributes, or who believe that, we can clash with the sunnah with our ra'i, or that we can blindly. What you are doing now is that you are opening the gates to justify the presence of all of this deviation. So even though the principle itself doesn't appear to be evil in its content, as when a person might say, for example, he might believe that the Qur'an is created, the actual implications and the effects and the consequences of that principle is more evil than an individual holding a bid'ah which in its content might even be kufr. Do you understand that principle? So now when this individual comes along and he says, this by way of this principle now, to refute falsehood is completely abolished. There's no such thing as refuting falsehood. We are all brothers. You are my Shiite brother. You are my Jahmi brother. You are my Ash'ari brother. The common thing between us is that we say La ilaha illallah. Forget all these differences. We need to unite. How evil. This is a destruction of the deen. This is what happened to the Jews and Christians. They made tabdeel of the religion. Why? Because they did not separate truth from falsehood. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we mentioned in yesterday's lesson, that this deen will be preserved. This deen will last until Yawmul Qiyamah. And for that reason, these usul can never ever be violated. This is why this is from the greatest of the battles, the ideological battle from the people of falsehood against Islam, against the Sunnah, against Salafiyyah, which is from Wahi. So now this is the first level, the first wave. This man came along and he introduced this principle. Okay, now we have 30 or 40 years later, we have another group of individuals. They've been reading the books of Hassan al-Banna. They've been reading the books of Sayyid Qutb. They've been reading the books of these people, Maududi. They're affected by this fikr, this poison. So they come along and they realize that some of the Imams of the Salaf and some of the Imams of the Sunnah in our time, that they have made criticisms against these people. Sayyid Qutb was a Jahmi in his Aqeedah. He was he spoke with the bid'ahs of the Sufis, of the Mu'tazila, of the Jahmiyyah, of the Ash'a'ira. He's upon the bid'ah of the Khawarij. Right? So the scholars began to criticize these people who are not upon the Sunnah. So when, and I'll mention the names, Salman al-Awdah, Abdul Rahman Abdul Khaliq, Adnan Arur. This now is the second wave, the second wave now. So remember, Hassan al-Banna comes along, he has demolished the asl of Ahlul Sunnah, which is to abandon innovation and its people, to warn from them and their books and their writings, to separate from them so their falsehood can't spread. So he's now demolished that foundation. That makes him, just that in itself makes him a mubtadi'. Let alone the fact that he denied Allah's attributes by way of tafweed, he was a Sufi, he was this or whatever. Just that in itself makes him a mubtadi'. And in fact, if he was present in the time of Imam Ahmad, they would have treated him worse on account of this principle than many of the evil innovators in that time. Why? Because the principle in its consequences is evil. It's the demolition of the religion. So now, this man comes along, and then we have these other people, Salman al-Awdah, Abdul Rahman Abdul Khaliq, Adnan Arur, and they see that this individual has been criticized, and Sayyid Qutb has been criticized, and Maududi has been criticized. Now what do? They come along and they say, you know what? They invent a new principle now. What is this principle? Can anyone tell me? MashaAllah, excellent. Al-Muwazanah. They brought this new principle to defend Ahlul Bid'ah, to defend them from being spoken against, which is al-Muwazanah. What does this mean? It means, now, they brought this principle, that when you criticize someone or refute someone, you have to mention his good deeds at the same time. Because if you don't, you have oppressed him. And this is from the greatest of batil, the greatest of falsehood. Because this is not from the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an, nor is it the way of the Messenger in the Sunnah, nor is it the way of the Sahaba, nor is it from the way of the Salaf. Because when they warned against, when the Salaf warned against the people of batil, when they said so-and-so is a Jahmi, did they say, yes, but he's a very generous at the same time? Did they do that? The answer is no. When you pick up the books of Ahadith, the books of Rijal, when they criticize certain people, that this one is a Murji, this one is a Qadri, this one is so-and-so, did they mention anything else along with that? That this man did Hajj 15 times, and this man did Umrah 10 times, and this man was nice to his children, this man was whatever. Did they mention that? No. Because what is the intention? The intention is to warn from falsehood and warn from its people. But when you now start saying, I know this man, he says that, I'm not sure where Allah is. Maybe he could be, above his throne. Maybe it could be upon the earth. I'm not really sure. Okay, maybe he's got this doubt, and maybe, but subhanAllah, he's at the prayer every day, and he's memorized the Qur'an, and then you mention all these good things. Wallahi, this is batil. And for that reason, so anyway, do you understand what's going on here now? Just like our example from yesterday that we said, that the Jahmiyyah came along and said Allah is not above the throne. Then another group came afterwards when the truth was made clear, and they said, well, yeah, Allah is above the throne, but He's not in a place. But they mean the same thing, right? The same thing is happening here with these usul, right? So the principle of Hassan al-Banna is refuted, demolished. Now they're trying to bring the same thing. Why? Because these people are upon the same manhaj. They want to gather the people together into a group. They want to make revolution against the rulers, topple them, because they believe the rulers are kuffar. Okay? So now, along come the second group, Salman al-Awdah, Abdul Rahman Abdul Khaliq, Adnan Arur. So that was the first one that we mentioned, al-Mawazana. Okay, this is al-Mawazana. Can anyone tell me another example of another false principle they brought in order to achieve the same objective?
For a person to be abandoned, all scholars have to agree that.
Okay, that's later on. You've jumped a step. That's later on. Okay, I'll tell you what it is. This comes from Salman al-Awdah. Look at the deception here. Look at the cunning and the conniving here. This man came along, Salman al-Awdah, he wrote a book. And in this book, he wanted to make a distinction between al-Ta'ifatul Mansura, which is mentioned in the Sunnah, and al-Firqatul Najiyah, which is mentioned in the Sunnah. Because there are some ahadith in which the Messenger said that this ummah will split to 73 sects, all of them in hellfire except for one. So this is Firqatul Najiyah. And then we have other ahadith in which the Messenger ﷺ said that there will never cease to be a group from my ummah, a ta'ifa upon my ummah, which is manifestly upon the truth. So this is what the scholars call a ta'ifatul mansura, the aided group. So along came Salman al-Awdah, he said, these two are two different groups. Okay? The firqatul najiyah, the one which is saved, includes many different groups. Ikhwān, Tabligh, Hizb al-Tahrir, it includes all those groups. But as for the Ta'ifatul Mansura, it is a very specific group referring to, the scholars who are firm upon the Sunnah and the people of Hadith and so on and so forth, whatever. Right? So he made a distinction. What is the purpose behind this distinction? Why did he do this? Huh? Yes, to basically accommodate Ahlul Bidah. Ikhwān, Tabligh, Hizb al-Tahrir, all of them are from the Firqatul Najiyah. So therefore this means that we can cooperate with them, we can work with them, we can make ta'awun with them. Same principle. But he's using this issue in a very deceptive way. For that reason, Shaykh Rabi refuted this man and he wrote a book. Al-Ta'ifatul Mansura is the Firqatul Najiyah, or the other way around. That Al-Firqatul Najiyah is the Ta'ifatul Mansura. So he said, Shaykh Rabi refuted this man's bid'ah and he established that the Firqatul Najiyah, that those who are the saved group, they are the same as the Ta'ifatul Mansura. They are those who are upon what the companions were upon. They are Ahlul Athar, they are Ahlul Hadith, they are Ahlul Sunnah, they are the Ghuraba. All of these are the same terms for one group of people. So the Shaykh saw what this man was trying to do. The Shaykh saw what he was trying to do. And so he refuted this man's bid'ah. So you see, that's another group. We see another man, Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq. He comes along. He's upon that same fikr, poisoned with that same fikr. He says, another principle, ta'addadul jama'at. This is his new principle out. Ta'addadul jama'at. What does this mean? The multiplicity of groups. So he began to say that this is something good. The fact that you have many jama'at working in da'wah, it has competition between them. They strive, have zeal, they work harder. This is something good. Ikhwān, Tabligh, Tahrir, this is something good. Right? So he brought this statement, ta'addadul jama'at. What's his intention? Same thing, because he's upon that bid of Hakimiyyah. He's upon that same thing. He was the one who promoted Tawhid al-Hakimiyyah. So takfir of the rulers, then gather all the people together to make. He's upon the same thing. So this is the intention. Okay, so now, when he wrote this book, Shaykh Rabi, حفظه ta'ala, wrote another book. He said, Jama'atun wahida, one jama'a, la jama'at, wasirat wahid, la, so he said one jama'a, not many jama'at, and sirat wahid, one path, not many paths. So the Shaykh defended the truth against this mubtadi, this innovator, who was trying to just, again, bring the same bid'ah of Hassan al-Banna, but in a very deceptive way. Right? So you see what's going on. Now we have another man, Adnan Arur. He's another Qutbi, another man who is following the fikr of Sayyid Qutb and Hassan al-Banna. He comes along and he brings other principles, again for the same objective. So he brings a principle, it is called Nusahih wala nujarrih, which means we correct the mistake, but we do not criticize or disparage. Can you see the connection of all these principles to the principle of Hassan al-Banna? It's all the same thing, but expressed in different ways. Just like the Jahmiyyah. the Qur'an is created. Then along comes another group. The Qur'an, which is Allah's speech, is kalam nafsi, but the Qur'an that we have, it's actually created. Then comes another group. I don't say the Qur'an is created, but my recitation of the Qur'an is created. What are all these people trying to say? The same thing. They're trying to deny that Allah speaks with speech tied to His will and power. Same with these people. With all these principles, they are trying to do the same thing. So now, what are these people trying to do? So the first level, what did I say? What was that level? Abolition. What does abolition mean? You completely abolish criticism altogether. Altogether, it's gone. There is no criticism. That's Hassan al-Banna. This group came along, these people that I mentioned, what are they trying to do? Can anyone think of a word? Can anyone think of the appropriate word as to what their objective is here? Huh? No. That's in the right direction. I'll tell you what it is. I'll give you the word. Neutralization. To neutralize. Right? So in Hassan al-Banna's example, there's no criticism. We don't refute bid'ah. We don't speak about anybody. There is no jarh. Full stop. There is nothing. Okay. Now, when it became established with the scholars that we refute these people and their mistakes and their aqeedah and so on and so forth and the methodologies, these people came along and they realized that, wait a minute, these scholars are definitely going to criticize these people. So what's the next best thing we can do? We can neutralize the criticism. Let's neutralize the criticism. So now you understand the principle. When you refute someone, you have to mention his good deeds so you don't wrong him. You understand? Right? So, yes, we know that they're going to get criticized, but let's neutralize the criticism. This is what these principles are about. Right? To neutralize that criticism. Nusahih wala nujarrih. All right, we correct the mistake, but let's not start speaking of that individual. You know? So, we have the Jahmiyyah present today. They believe Allah is everywhere, or they believe Allah is not upon the throne. What does this mean? Yeah, let's just refute the mistake. Yes, to believe Allah is not above the throne is a mistake. So what they're trying to say is, just do that and don't do anything else. Don't do anything else. Don't start criticizing people and saying this one's a Jahmi, this one's a Mu'attil, this one's this. Don't do that. Just criticize the mistake and then, that's it. What do they intend by this? They intend by this to defend Ahlul Bid'ah, to defend them. Same, so do you understand how the Bid'ah is evolving, becoming more subtle, becoming more complex? So this now is the second group. Second group now in the middle. Right, now we come to the third group. And this collection of people, they came with the biggest war and the biggest battle. Al-Ma'ribi, Abu al-Hasan al-Ma'ribi, Ali Hassan al-Halabi, Abdul Malik al-Ramadani, who were upon this new, now we're in the 10 years, now we're in 2010 and whatever is before that. So this Ma'ribi, Abu Hassan al-Ma'ribi, he's an Ikhwani. He was a Takfiri from Egypt. He fled Egypt. He went to Yemen. He must have spent maybe 6 months with Shaykh Muqbil, 6 months. And then he used to travel to Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah. He only made 3 travels. 1410, 1416, 1418. He did some cassettes and then it became famous that, Al-Ma'ribi sitting with Albani and whatever. So he's not really studied with any of the scholars. He came along. His asal is that he is a Takfiri Ikhwani from Egypt. So he came along and he's upon this same thing. He's upon this same thing. He then brought some more principles and some more ideas which have the exact same objective. So what are these principles and these ideas? From them is at-tathabbut. This word at-tathabbut, it all sounds good. At-tathabbut means to verify, to make sure, to corroborate, tathabbut. And what he means by this is that when someone, an alim from Ahlul Sunnah, he refutes a mubtadi', like for example when Shaykh Rabi refutes Sayyid Qutb for all of his bid'ahs, or when one of the scholars of the Sunnah refutes someone, he says, right, I'm not going to take it from him, I'm going to go and verify myself. I'm going to go and make tathabbut. So let me go and read the books of that man and see, okay, is everything correct and is this or whatever. This principle of tathabbut, really, what he intends by it, even though it sounds good, he intends by it to reject the criticism against the innovators and the criticism against the books of the innovators. Do we find this principle from the Salaf? Do we find any of the Imams of the Salaf acting upon this? When Imam Ahmad said, Fulan Jahmi, so-and-so is a Jahmi. Don't take nothing from him. Or like, for example, when he criticized Harith al-Muhasibi, or when he criticized Hussein al-Karabisi, that this man is a khabith. Leave him. He's someone who's inherited the way of Bishr al-Marisi. Did you find the companions of Imam Ahmad saying, you know what, Imam Ahmad, let me just go and check with Bishr al-Marisi, and let me just go and check with Hussein al-Karabisi. Quick announcement, the neighbors are complaining that there is a black glazier car blocking their parking space in the back of the masjid. The license plate is AMKS 836. If this is your car, please remove it as soon as possible. A black glazier car, AMKS 836. Okay, so do we find that any of the companions of Imam Ahmad said to Imam Ahmad, you know what, let me just go and speak to Hussein al-Karabisi, let me see what he says, and let me just make tathabbut in this issue. Did you ever find that? Did you ever find that? Is this from the way of the Sunnah? When an Imam of the Sunnah refutes someone in an innovation whose batil has become clear, do we need to make tathabbut on that? No. What these people are really trying to say is that when an alim today criticizes, for example, Ikhwān al-Muslimīn, or Jama'at al-Tabligh, or Hizb al-Tahrir, or any of their figureheads, or any of the people who follow that way, and he says, this person, we can see that from his kalam and from his statements, this person is clearly an Ikhwani. What they really want to say is, we can't accept that straight away, let's just go and make tathabbut. Let's just go and do some investigation. What they really want to try and do is to nurture the youth upon this idea that we don't accept things straight away, that we should go and make tathabbut and whatever. It's a very deceptive way of trying to reach the same objective, to defend Ahlul Bidah, to put barriers between the people accepting the warnings of the scholars against the Ahlul Bidah, to put as many barriers as possible. So this is at-tathabbut. Okay, look at how it's becoming more sophisticated, more tricky, more deceptive, more, subtle. Likewise, another one of his principles is al-mujmal wal-mufassal. Al-mujmal wal-mufassal. The general and the specific. What does he mean by this? The reason why he invented this principle is because Sayyid Qutb was being refuted by the ulama for his statements of disbelief, for his statements of wahdatul wujud, for his statements refuting, criticizing the Sahaba. So he came with this principle and said, right, when we see someone makes a general statement, which seems to be an error, then we need to go back and look at some other statements of his, where he might have spoken specifically. And then from that, we shouldn't do injustice to him, we should put them two together and make an excuse for him. Right? So, let me give you an implementation of this principle. In other words, what he's trying to say is, let's say, for example, Sayyid Qutb says that Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu and Amr bin al-As radiyallahu anhu, that they used deception and trickery and nifaq, they used hypocrisy in all these different ways in order to plot against Ali. And so he makes some statement like this. And likewise, he criticizes Uthman, for example. Okay, now, what al-Ma'rabi is saying, we can't really criticize this man up until we've gone and looked at all of his other statements. Maybe he praised Uthman. Maybe he praised the Sahaba. So when we find this other statement, then we put the two together and then we look at his other statement in a positive light. This Ikhwān is the greatest of batil. This is falsehood. And obviously, an elaboration upon this principle is detailed and lengthy. We don't really want to go into that here. But the point that we're making is that you should see that, look at what the intent behind this principle is. The principle is to defend the people of innovation, to defend their statements, to silence the people from criticism, to make every excuse possible to defend them. Yet at the same time, what do we see from these same people? They are attacking Ahlul Sunnah, attacking their scholars, criticizing the Salafis, refuting them, making all sorts of ta'an upon them. So we have lenience towards Ahlul Bidah, defense of Ahlul Bidah, but nothing but harshness towards the people of the Sunnah. So anyway, this is another principle invented by these people for the same objective. Another example of their inventions, which is one of Ali Hassan al-Halabi, which is that before we accept the criticism of any alim, there must be ijma'. There has to be consensus that every alim from Ahlul Sunnah has to be agreed that this individual is a mubtadi', or this individual is a Jahmi, or this individual is a Takfiri, or this individual is a Khariji, or this individual is a Mu'tazili. So now it is that they specify a condition that there must be an ijma'. This is the bid'ah of Ali Hassan al-Halabi. What an evil bid'ah this is. Did you find in the time of Imam Ahmad when he spoke against Hussein al-Qarabisi, was there ijma' amongst the ulama? Was there ijma' amongst the ulama? Was every alim in the whole dunya who was upon the sunnah, in every single place in the dunya, was he agreed that Hussein al-Qarabisi is mubtadi'? Who spoke about him? One man, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he spoke about him. And this man fell. This man was considered a mubtadi'. When one of the imams spoke against some person, everyone abandoned him. Until when he died, maybe there were 3-4 people who prayed over him. Hussein, al-Harith al-Muhasibi, 4 people prayed over him. This man had knowledge, he had piety, but he entered into something of kalam and tasawwuf. Imam Ahmad spoke against him. 4 men prayed over this individual. Was there ijma' amongst the ulama in that time? Was there ijma'? No. Imam Ahmad spoke against him. So this principle that they've brought of specifying the making is a condition that all the scholars have to be united before we now abandon someone or make tabdi of him. This is from the greatest of batil. And the intent behind it is the same as all the other false principles. Al-mawazana, ta'addadul jama'at, nusahih wa la nujarrih, at-tathabbut. The same objective. And likewise they say, another principle, la yalzimuni. This is another principle, la yalzimuni. That unless there is ijma' of the scholars, I am not obliged to take anything of your criticism against anybody. I want to see ijma' before I will now agree with the tabdi'. Okay? So again, you see the evil of this principle. What they're trying to say is, for example, when a person abandons the sunnah and leaves the sunnah, and the scholars make it clear about this individual, like for example al-Maghrawi, he made statements of making takfir of the whole ummah. The scholars advised him. Shaykh Ahmad al-Najmi refuted him. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen refuted some of his kalam, some of his speech. Shaykh Rabi advised him, corrected him. This man never made tawbah. He claimed that the verses in the Qur'an that mention nifaq apply 100% to 100% of the ummah. You made takfir of the whole ummah. He was advised about this, he did not make tawbah. So now he became a mubtadi' after the hujjah was established. So now these people, al-Maghrawi, because he's their companion, he's their associate, they were making all these principles to defend that individual. We need to have ijma', we need to carry mujmal upon mufassal, we need to make tathabbut. All excuses in order not to accept the refutations of the scholars against the mubtadi'ah. So the point being here is that all of these are some of the foundations of these people, al-Halabi, al-Ma'rabi, and you can see that this really is from the greatest and most evil of bid'ahs that we have ever come across in the history of Islam. In the whole history of Islam. These principles that we are seeing now, because they undermine the very religion of Islam and the very usul of Islam. For that reason we see that Shaykh Rabi, hafظه ta'ala, that he has expended great efforts, may Allah reward this great Imam, in refuting all of these people. Wallahi, if you knew what Shaykh Rabi has done, wallahi, your love for this man, wallahi, is something that would, is something that we can't really. What this man has done, walhamdulillah, is comparable to what Imam Ahmad rahimahullah did in that time. Because Imam Ahmad, the poison of kalam which entered into the ummah, he stood up to that poison. He defeated the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila, and they fell, and they were defeated, and they declined on account of what Imam Ahmad did in standing up to these mubtadi'ah. So he fought kalam with wahi. Likewise, Shaykh Rabi, when you appreciate what this man has done in exposing this evil mubtadi' Sayyid Qutb, and refuting the principle of Hassan al-Banna, and refuting all of these people who came along, these people who were deceptive to the ummah, Salman al-Awdah, Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq, Adnan Arur, al-Ma'rabi, and now al-Halabi, and now al-Ram, all these people, you will truly appreciate what this man has done. He has defended wahi Salafiyyah, Sunnah, from this poison of fiqh that we mentioned that came into the ummah, and its the innovations that came through it, you will love this man. And I believe that many of these ignoramuses who are present today, these people, they hate Shaykh Rabi because it is upon ignorance, really. A lot of them do not understand these issues. And so they hate him upon ignorance, and many of them hate him upon hawa, because they have jahl. They have jahl. They don't understand these issues. But if a person was sincere and he truly understood what's going on and what's really happened, and he understood what role this man has played in defending the Aqeedah of Islam and defending the methodologies of Islam, wallahi, he will love this man more than his parents, his children, this is how we see, obviously we don't claim that a person is not free of mistakes. We don't make ghulu, because no one is free of mistakes. But at the same time, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He places people whom He makes imams, who defend the religion, like as we see in the hadith, يَحْمِلُ هَذَا الْعِلْمِ مِنْ كُلِّ خَلَفٍ أُدُولُهُ, that this knowledge will be carried in every generation by its trustworthy, upright people. They will remove from it the false interpretations of the ignorant to the end of the hadith. So we this is how we look at the situation. So coming now to a close, inshallah ta'ala, from this we should put into perspective certain types of behavior that we see from certain people. Right? Because these people that we saw, this third group, al-Ma'ribi, al-Halabi, these people, what do we see from them? We see them, on the one hand, we see them using every principle and excuse to defend Sayyid Qutb, and to defend the Jama'at of Hizbiyah, to defend Ikhwān and Tabligh and Hizb al-Tahrir, to defend all of these groups. On the one hand, all these principles they're inventing is to defend these groups. And on the other hand, we see them showing so much harshness and severity and mockery and ridicule of the Salafis. Now, this behavior here, it is a disease and a poison which is a result of that fikr and all of the false usul that resulted from it. Wallahi, we see there are people poisoned with this poison today. We see people making a claim to being Salafi. They are Salafi. They claim, we are Salafi. We are with the scholars. We are with the scholars. And then you see that in their behavior and in their wala and in their bara, in their loyalty and allegiance, you will see the greatest of contradiction. The greatest of contradiction. And this is why Shaykh Rabi, hafidhahullah, he made an amazing remark about these people. He said these people are the ghullatul murji'ah. They are from the most extremist of the murji'ah. Because they claim, as Shaykh Rabi says, that a man can claim Salafiyyah and he will never, ever, ever leave Salafiyyah. Just like the Jahmiyyah used to say, or the Murji'ah used to say, that a man, as long as he has belief in his heart that Allah exists, he can never ever leave Islam no matter what he does. He can prostrate to an idol, he can believe in the Trinity, he can abuse the messenger, abuse the religion. He can't leave Islam. Why? Because tasdeeq is in his heart. Right? So Shaykh Rabi is saying that what we have today from these people claiming to be upon Salafiyyah, they are ghullatul murji'ah. Because what are these people really saying? These people are saying that I can claim to be Salafi, I can claim to have the belief in Allah's names and attributes, and believe, everything that we believe as Salafis. And then I have someone else on this side who believes the same thing which I believe. He believes in Allah, the names, the attributes, all upon the way and the Aqeedah of the Salafiyyah. And then there is another person over here who is upon batil and falsehood. He's defending the Hizbiyyin. He's promoting the Ahlul Bid'ah. And so I can love this person and ally with this person and defend this person, and at the same time speak ill of that one and plot against him and criticize him and refute him and show evil and harshness towards him, and I can still remain Salafi. I can still be a Salafi. This is a contradiction. It's impossible. It is not possible. And so this is what we mean, this behavior that we are seeing from certain people, this is a result of this poison which has come through these people. It is why, for this reason, we see that a person's Salafiyyah is not sound up until he frees himself and makes his position known against those whom the scholars have proven that they are upon bid'ah and dalala. Let me give you an example from history. In the time of Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, the Jahmiyyah, before his time, the Jahmiyyah used to say, al-Qur'an kalamullah. The Qur'an is the speech. Sorry, there was a group who came and they began to conceal themselves. Right? They used to say the Qur'an is the kalam of Allah, is the speech of Allah, and then they would stop. They would stop. They would stop. They would not say anything else. Whereas from the Imams of the Salaf, there were maybe 1,000 Imams of the Salaf who realized that this is an ambiguous statement. You could be concealing falsehood behind this. Because you could be intending to say the Qur'an is the speech of Allah, but my recitation of the Qur'an is created. Or you could be meaning something else. So all of these scholars, they began to say the Qur'an is the kalam of Allah, غير مخلوق. They added غير مخلوق. Okay, now, if once all these scholars, there were 1,000 scholars who began to make this statement, to express and to make clear the truth. Anyone who came along after this and began to say Al-Quran, Kalamullah, and stopped, they treated him to be a mubtadi'. These are the people which are called the waqifah. The waqifah, those who said something a little bit and then they stopped. They didn't go any further. So they said the Quran is the speech of Allah, then they stopped. They failed to make bayan. Why? Because now this statement has become a general ambiguous statement. Al-Quran, Kalamullah. It is no longer enough to be, the clear truth. So now if you come along and you know that all of the Imams of the Sunnah, or a large group of the Imams of the Sunnah have said Al-Quran, Kalamullah, غير مخلوق, and you deliberately withhold, that means you are concealing batil. You are concealing falsehood. So likewise in our time, we see that when the scholars of the Sunnah have made it absolutely clear about these people that they are upon usul which are batil, which undermine the religion, and that they are following in this their people who came before them, like al-Banna and Salman al-Awdah. And so we see a person refuses to make his position clear. This doesn't involve me. This is a fitna. I'm keeping out of this. That means there's something wrong with you. You are concealing something. Either it is jahl or it is hawa. It is not possible for you not to make the position clear. It's not possible. It's like in Imam Ahmad's time. If you said, I'm just going to say the Qur'an is kalamullah, all this other fitna, I don't really want to get involved in this. It's not for me. Just keep me out. I'm just going to say the Qur'an is the kalam of Allah. Do you think this would have been accepted? Would that be accepted from you in the time of Imam Ahmad? Answer? No. Rather you would have been put along those people and treated like them. Those people emerge in that time. They are called the waqifah. The waqifah. To be honest, these people today are similar from one angle to those people. Yes, I'm with Shaykh Ibn Baz, I'm with Shaykh al-Albani, I'm with Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, I'm with Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, I'm with Shaykh Rabi, I'm with Shaykh Abdul Muhsin, I'm with all these ulama. But with this issue, I don't really want to speak about this, it's fitna. No. You are someone who is concealing something. You are hiding something. Because if you understood the principles of this religion, you would realize that when an alim brings proof and evidence upon the misguidance of an individual and the hujjah is established, he becomes a mubtadi'. Even if it is one alim. How then when there's 2, 3, 4, 5 and the hujjah has been established and that person has shown willful, stubborn resistance, how then can you now claim, I'm going to withhold, I'm with the ulama, whatever. You are concealing something in your heart. And that will be proven by your company. As the Salaf used to say, Man satara anna bid'atah, lam tukhfa alayna ul-Fatah. That whoever conceals his innovation from us, he will never be able to conceal his companionship from us. This is why it's a principle of our religion that we judge the people by their companionship. Who you're mixing with, who you're sitting with, who you're allying with, who you're friends with. You can hide everything else, but that will expose you for what you are. Okay? So anyway, ya ikhwan, we come to a conclusion. There is much more that can be said, but the aim here really was to put some historical perspective on this ideological attack against Salafiyyah in our time today. These are the heads of bid'ah in our time. There is no bid'ah that is more harmful to Islam than the bid'ahs that these people are bringing. Because the intention behind all of them is to destroy a mighty foundation of this religion by which the very preservation of this religion depends. By which the very preservation of this Aqeedah depends. Imagine that these people succeed in all these principles. Do you think that in 200 years the Muslims would have this Sunnah and Salafiyyah that we are upon? Do you think it would remain? The answer is no. This is what happened with the Jews and the Christians. So this is why this is a battle between wahi, revelation, and this fikr and kalam and all this other batil, this ra'i, which has come from the opinions of men for whatever objectives they have. So with that we conclude this session. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah.